Step away from the aircraft. Pilots do not look like you. The words did not just fall, they detonated. Sandra Whitfield's voice cut through Boston Logan's Terminal C like a controlled explosion loud enough that 3 gates away, passengers stopped mid-step. The holiday crowd at gate C-17 froze in collective disbelief. Christmas lights twinkled overhead in cruel irony. Joy to the World played softly through the terminal speakers, but there was no joy in this moment. Only the cold, sharp blade of prejudice slicing through the December air. Captain Nathaniel Brooks stood beneath the white airport lights, still in the pilot uniform he had worn with honor for 22 years. 4 silver stripes gleamed on his shoulders, each one representing thousands of hours in the sky, hundreds of safe landings, countless lives trusted to his steady hands. His credentials were in his grip, the documents proving he was the only person authorized to place his hands on the controls of Atlantic Sky Airlines Flight 1847 to Miami. But Sandra Whitfield saw none of that. She saw only what she wanted to see. She walked toward him, her high heels striking the polished floor in hard, deliberate beats, as if she were nailing authority into the tiles with every step. Her bleached blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, her lips pressed into a thin line of manufactured concern. 12 years with Atlantic Sky had taught her how to weaponize procedure, how to dress discrimination in the language of safety. Someone raised a phone. A lens lit up. The recording began. Sandra snatched the boarding authorization from Nate's hand before he could respond. She held the document between 2 fingers, examining it with exaggerated suspicion, as though it might contaminate her with its very existence. Her nose wrinkled. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "These documents do not match our system records," she declared loud enough for the entire gate area to hear. "I am calling security." Nate's response came measured and calm, each word placed with the precision of a man who had learned long ago that volume was the enemy of authority. "Check again. Captain Nathaniel Brooks, Flight 1847 to Miami. I filed the flight plan 4 hours ago." Sandra's lips curled into something that might have been a smile on someone with warmth in their heart. On her, it was a sneer dressed in professionalism. "Anyone can print a fake badge. I have seen this before. People like you think you can just walk into any space and claim it belongs to you. People like you." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire just beginning to burn. Then it happened. The moment that would change everything. Sandra gripped the boarding authorization with both hands, and with one sharp motion she tore it clean in half. The pieces fluttered down onto Nate's polished shoes like a choreographed act of humiliation, like confetti at a funeral for dignity. The sound of tearing paper cut through the terminal sharper than any scream. A gasp rippled through the gathered passengers. Holiday music continued playing a cruel soundtrack to cruelty. Silent Night had never sounded so loud. Security. Sandra's voice rang out like a fire alarm. "We have an unauthorized individual attempting to access the aircraft. I need security at gate C-17. Immediately, Nate looked down at the torn documents at his feet. 22 years of service, 14,200 flight hours, decorations from the United States Air Force, lives saved during storms that would have terrified lesser pilots. All of it reduced to paper scraps on an airport floor 3 days before Christmas. A hot rush ran along his spine. Not anger, familiarity. The feeling of a black man who had learned to stand upright in a world constantly trying to break him. He had felt this before. He would feel it again, but he would never, ever break. Nate said nothing. He only looked at Sandra, his eyes calm like the ocean before a storm. "Before we dive deeper into this story, I need to ask, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And if this opening made your blood pressure rise, hit subscribe and like. Because what happens in the next 30 minutes will change everything you think you know about prejudice, power, and the price of standing tall during the season of peace. Because the man Sandra Whitfield was trying to push out of the sky, he was not just any pilot. He was one of the most decorated captains in American commercial aviation, a man who had landed during Category 4 hurricanes, a man who had saved a wounded general in enemy territory, a man who held authority that Sandra could not even imagine, and he had just been handed the evidence he needed. The storm was only beginning. Sandra Whitfield stood her ground at the jet bridge entrance like a guard at a fortress gate. Arms crossed, chin lifted, radiating the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. The torn boarding authorization lay scattered at her feet, evidence she seemed to consider proof of her vigilance rather than her violation. "You are not boarding this aircraft," she announced, her voice carrying across the gate area with practiced authority. "Not until we verify exactly who you are and how you obtained these documents." Nate remained perfectly still. His hands stayed at his sides, fingers relaxed but not limp. 22 years of flying had taught him to control his body under pressure turbulence, mechanical failures, medical emergencies. This was just another kind of storm, one he had weathered before. "Those documents are legitimate," he said, his voice low and steady. "I am Captain Nathaniel Brooks. I have been flying for Atlantic Sky Airlines for over 2 decades. My credentials are in your system. All you have to do is check." Sandra's smile sharpened. "I already checked. There is no record of you being assigned to this flight." "Then check again, or call dispatch, or contact the chief pilot's office. There are procedures for this. I know the procedures." Sandra's tone dripped with condescension, the kind reserved for explaining simple things to simple people. "The procedure is that when someone's documentation raises concerns, we err on the side of caution, especially these days. Especially with..." She let the sentence trail off, her eyes scanning him from his shoes to his captain's hat. "Certain individuals." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. From the boarding area, passengers had begun to gather. Some stood at a distance, watching with the uncomfortable fascination of witnesses to a car accident. Others inched closer, phones appearing in hands with the reflexive urgency of the digital age. The terminal's Christmas decorations, wreaths, ribbons, a mechanical Santa waving endlessly seemed to mock the scene unfolding beneath them. An older Hispanic woman clutched a rosary in weathered hands. Rosa Delgado, 71 years old, had been traveling from her home in Texas to spend Christmas with her grandchildren in Miami. She had lived through enough years to recognize injustice when she saw it. Her lips moved silently in prayer, but her eyes stayed fixed on the confrontation. Beside her, a small boy tugged at her sleeve. Tommy Delgado, 8 years old, his Spider-Man backpack slightly too big for his narrow shoulders. "Grandma," he whispered, "what is happening? Why is that lady yelling at the pilot?" Rosa pulled him closer. "I do not know, mijo, but I do not think it is right." Across the seating area, Derek Sullivan had stopped mid-scroll through his email. The 34-year-old tech entrepreneur from San Francisco recognized a story when he saw one. His company had 4 million followers across social platforms. His instinct for content was nearly as sharp as his instinct for injustice. He opened his camera app and began recording. "This is going viral," he muttered to himself. "This is absolutely going viral." Sandra, oblivious to the growing documentation of her behavior, continued her performance. She turned slightly, addressing the gathered passengers as much as Nate. "I want everyone to know that Atlantic Sky takes security extremely seriously. When something does not feel right, we investigate. We do not just let anyone walk onto our aircraft." "I am not anyone," Nate replied, his calm unshaken. "I am the captain." "So you claim. So my credentials prove. The credentials you just destroyed." For a flicker of a moment, something crossed Sandra's face, doubt perhaps, or the first whisper of fear. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, buried beneath 12 years of getting away with behavior just like this. "Those credentials were suspicious," she said firmly. "The badge looked off. The authorization code did not match what I expected. I made a judgment call. You made a judgment, Nate agreed, but not based on the credentials. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. The terminal noise seemed to recede announcements, conversations, the endless hum of travel, leaving only the silent confrontation between a pilot who knew his worth and a flight attendant who had decided he was worthless. James Crawford watched from the first-class boarding line. 69 years old, retired airline executive, 40 years in the industry. He had seen this scene play out more times than he could count. The questioning, the doubt, the polite brutality of assumptions dressed in procedure. He had watched it happen to colleagues, to subordinates, to strangers in terminals just like this one. And every single time he had said nothing. His wife's voice echoed in his memory. Louise had died last spring, leaving him alone for his first Christmas in 43 years of marriage. "When will you stop being a bystander, James?" She had asked him once years ago after he had told her about a pilot who had been demoted for reasons that never quite made sense. He had not had an answer then. He was not sure he had one now. But something in his chest felt different today. Something stirred that he had kept buried for far too long. Near the window, Sofia Morales sat with her phone already open to social media. The 28-year-old medical resident was used to being doubted. She had been asked if she was really a doctor more times than she could count. She had been mistaken for a nurse, a technician, a translator. She recognized the look in Sandra's eyes, the certainty that came from prejudice so deep it felt like common sense to those who carried it. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She was not sure yet what to write, but she knew she would write something. Sandra reached for her company phone. "I am contacting security, and I am filing an incident report. Your behavior today." "My behavior." For the first time, Nate's voice carried an edge. Not anger, but steel. "I walked to my gate. I presented my credentials. You tore them in half without verification, and now you are filing a report about my behavior. You are being hostile. I am being accurate. There is a difference." Sandra's jaw tightened. She tapped her phone screen with aggressive precision. "Security to Gate C-17. I need security to Gate C-17 immediately. We have a situation with an individual claiming to be a crew member." The word claiming landed like a slap. Nate's expression did not change, but somewhere deep behind those calm eyes, a decision crystallized. He had hoped this would resolve quietly, professionally, without escalation. But Sandra had made her choice. Now it was time to make his. The call would come soon, but first he would give her every chance to stop, every opportunity to reconsider, every moment to recognize what she was about to destroy. Not because he was weak, because he was patient, and patience, he had learned, was its own form of power. They came from two directions. 3 security officers converging on Gate C-17 with the urgent efficiency of men responding to a genuine threat. Black shoes, black gloves, hands resting near equipment on their belts. Their eyes assessed the scene in rapid snapshots. A black man in a pilot uniform, a white woman in flight attendant dress, visibly distressed. Torn documents scattered on the floor. The equation was simple. The equation was wrong, but they had been taught to solve it quickly. "Sir," the lead officer's voice was rigid as steel. "I am going to need you to step aside, hands where we can see them. No questions, no verification, no attempt to understand what had actually happened, just the immediate assumption of guilt wrapped in the language of procedure." Nate raised his hands slowly. He had learned long ago that sudden movements in situations like this could become headlines in 30 seconds. Every gesture measured, every breath controlled. The calm of a man who understood exactly what he was dealing with and exactly what it could cost him if he gave them what they expected. "Officers," he said evenly, "I am Captain Nathaniel Brooks. I am scheduled to fly Flight 1847 to Miami this afternoon. My credentials were torn by this flight attendant before she verified them. He is lying. Sandra's voice cut in sharp and quick. He showed up at the gate with suspicious documents. When I questioned them, he became hostile. I felt threatened for my safety and the safety of the aircraft. One of the officers, younger, eager, the kind who wanted to prove himself, stepped closer to Nate. "Sir, we are going to need you to come with us. We will sort this out away from the gate. I would like to have my credentials verified first. Contact dispatch. Contact the chief pilot's office. This can be resolved in 60 seconds. We will determine how it is resolved." The lead officer's hand moved to Nate's arm. "Step this way, please." The touch was light, but the message was clear. Compliance was not optional. Rosa Delgado had seen enough. She rose from her seat, her small frame trembling with something that might have been age but felt more like righteous anger. "Wait!" She called out, her voice carrying further than seemed possible for a woman her size. "Wait just one moment." The officers turned. Sandra's eyes narrowed with annoyance. I saw everything. Rosa continued making her way toward them with Tommy's hand clutched tightly in hers. That man showed his credentials. She tore them before she even looked at them properly, before she checked anything. I watched it happen. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." The lead officer's tone was dismissive, a verbal pat on the head. "This is an airline security matter. It is a human dignity matter." Rosa's chin lifted. "And I will not be silent while you treat a pilot like a criminal for the crime of existing." Tommy looked up at his grandmother with wide eyes. He did not fully understand what was happening, but he understood her tone. He had never heard her speak like this before. Then his gaze shifted to Nate, to the uniform, to the wings on his chest, to the hands raised in compliance with demands that did not deserve to be made. Grandma Tommy said, his voice small but clear in the sudden quiet, "Is that man a bad guy?" The question cut through the terminal like a blade. Is that man a bad guy? The innocence of it, the simplicity. A child trying to make sense of a scene that made no sense, trying to understand why the pilot was being treated like a villain when all he had done was try to do his job. Rosa knelt beside her grandson, her eyes glistening. "No, mijo. He is not a bad guy. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes people judge others before they know them." She looked up at Nate. In her eyes he saw something that had become rare in moments like this: belief. Belief in his truth before anyone had proven it. Sandra scoffed audibly. "Can we please continue with security protocols? I do not have time for this. We have a flight to board." "With what captain?" The question came from someone in the crowd, Derek Sullivan, still recording, unable to contain his disbelief. "You just accused your pilot of being a fraud. Who is going to fly the plane?" Sandra's composure flickered. It was a question she clearly had not considered in her rush to judgment. That is not your concern. Atlantic Sky has procedures that include tearing someone's credentials without checking them. Derek stepped forward, phone steady. "Because I have got that on video. The whole thing, from the moment you said pilots do not look like you." Color drained from Sandra's face, then returned in an angry flush. "Put that phone away. You cannot record airline personnel without consent. We are in a public terminal, and you just publicly accused a man of fraud." Derek did not lower the phone. "I think the public has a right to know about this," the crowd murmured. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. This was not unfolding the way routine security situations unfolded. There were too many witnesses, too many cameras, too many variables. Nate lowered his hands slowly, carefully, watching for any sign of escalation from the officers. "I will cooperate with whatever process you need," he said. "But I want it on record that I am who I say I am. And I want it on record that I have requested verification multiple times." The lead officer hesitated. Something in Nate's voice, the absolute certainty, the complete absence of desperation, gave him pause. But before he could respond, Sandra stepped forward with renewed aggression. "Record whatever you want. It will not change the facts. This man does not belong here, and I will not let him anywhere near that aircraft." Nate looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment something shifted behind his eyes. The calm remained, but beneath it a decision had been made. It was time to make the call. What none of them knew, not Sandra, not the security officers, not even the witnesses who would later tell this story, was that Captain Nathaniel Brooks was not simply a pilot. He was a weapon that America's aviation industry had unwittingly handed to the very people who would one day need to expose its deepest flaws. Nate had been born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1978, the son of Raymond Brooks, a carpenter who built churches with his bare hands, and Grace Brooks, a schoolteacher who taught her son that education was the door no one could close. They were working-class people in a working-class neighborhood, but they raised their son with a wealth that had nothing to do with money, dignity, discipline, and the unshakable belief that he could be anything he chose to be. At 17, Nate had watched the Blue Angels perform at an air show, their jets screaming across the sky in perfect formation. Something ignited in him that day, a calling that would define his entire life. He was not just going to fly, he was going to soar. He enlisted in the Air Force at 18, commissioned as an officer at 22, and began flying helicopters over terrain that would appear in his nightmares for decades. Iraq, Afghanistan, missions he could not speak about in the classified silence of black operations. By 28, he had flown over 400 combat missions, earning decorations that sat in a drawer at his mother's house, rarely discussed, never displayed. But one mission changed everything. November 2009, Afghanistan. Lieutenant Nathaniel Brooks was piloting a routine transport helicopter through airspace that intelligence had cleared just 6 hours earlier. Intelligence was wrong. A surface-to-air missile caught the tail rotor with mechanical precision, sending the aircraft spiraling toward the rocky desert below. Nate fought the controls with everything he had. Years of training, thousands of hours of instinct, the desperate will to survive, all of it channeled into his grip on the cyclic and collective. He could feel the Black Hawk dying around him, feel the physics that wanted to turn them into a crater, feel death reaching for everyone on board. He would not let it have them. The auto-rotation was textbook, or would have been if textbooks covered auto-rotations performed while a tail rotor disintegrated and smoke poured into the cockpit. Nate picked a landing zone by instinct more than vision, a flat stretch of rocky ground that might not kill them on impact. They hit hard. Metal screamed. Dust exploded around them in a choking cloud. Something in Nate's shoulder wrenched, sending fire down his arm. But his hand stayed on the controls until the aircraft stopped moving, until the rotors had spun down, until silence replaced chaos. For a moment, no one moved. 4 crew members, 1 general, 5 lives that should have ended in twisted metal and jet fuel fire. Then the moaning started. General Patterson was pinned in his seat, his left leg twisted at an angle that made Nate's stomach lurch. Blood was already pooling beneath him, arterial blood, the bright red kind that meant minutes, not hours. His face was gray with shock and pain, but his eyes found Nate's with the clarity of a man who understood exactly how bad things were. Lieutenant Patterson managed through gritted teeth. The radio Nate checked. Destroyed. The impact had shattered the communication array. They were cut off invisible 30 kilometers from the nearest friendly position. And according to his mental map, the nearest enemy patrol was approximately 15 minutes away. Co-pilot Lieutenant James Wheeler, his face cut by shattered glass, was already moving toward the rear of the aircraft. "We need to move. They will have seen us go down." Sergeant Carlos Mendez, the crew chief, was helping Specialist Amy Foster extract herself from her jump seat. Both were rattled but mobile. That left only the general. Nate knelt beside Patterson, and assessed the injury with the quick efficiency of combat medical training. The leg was shattered, multiple fractures, blood loss significant, but not yet critical. With proper care, he would survive. Without it, he had maybe 2 hours. The problem was movement. Patterson was 200 pounds of wounded senior officer. Moving him would be agony for him and a massive burden for whoever carried him. Protocol said to stabilize him here and send the mobile crew for help. Protocol said that in situations like this, you saved the most people possible, which meant prioritizing those who could walk. Protocol said to leave him. Nate looked at the general, this man he had only read about in briefings. This mythology in uniform, who was now bleeding out in the wreckage of a helicopter Nate had failed to protect. Lieutenant Patterson said, reading Nate's face, "I am ordering you to get the crew to safety. Leave me. That is a direct order. With respect, sir, I am going to disobey that order." Nate stood and called to the others. "Wheeler, you have got point. Mendez and Foster cover our 6. We are moving east toward the extraction corridor. 3 miles. Wheeler's eyes went wide. 3 miles carrying the general. That is possible. Move out. Nate crouched and lifted Patterson onto his back in a fireman's carry. The general groaned a sound of pure agony that he tried to strangle into silence. 200 pounds of wounded authority settled onto Nate's shoulders, and he felt his muscles scream in protest. He started walking anyway. The terrain was brutal. Rocks that cut through boots, sand that sucked at every step, the sun rising to pour heat onto them like a punishment. Every step sent jolts of pain through Nate's wrenched shoulder, through his straining back, through legs that wanted to buckle and refused only because he refused to let them. Behind them, distant shouts suggested the enemy had found the crash site. The clock was running. Lieutenant Patterson whispered, his voice ragged. "You are going to get yourself killed. That is my choice to make, sir. It is not worth it. Not for one man." Nate adjusted his grip and kept walking. "Every man is worth it, General. Every single one." The 3 miles took 97 minutes. 97 minutes of walking, sometimes stumbling, occasionally crawling when the terrain demanded it. 97 minutes of carrying a man who outranked him by light years through territory that wanted them dead toward a hope of rescue that grew thinner with every step. They reached the extraction corridor with 2 minutes to spare. The QRF found them there, 5 figures staggering out of the dust, one barely conscious, all alive. Against every odd, against every protocol, against every voice that whispered about acceptable losses and difficult choices. They were alive because Nate had refused to leave anyone behind. Patterson survived. 18 months of surgery and rehabilitation rebuilt his leg, if not perfectly. He walked with a cane for the rest of his life, a reminder of the day a young pilot had carried him out of hell. The general never forgot. A year after Nate transitioned to commercial aviation, a handwritten letter arrived at his home. The envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting inside was precise and military. "Lieutenant Brooks, I have followed your career with great interest. You have become exactly the pilot I knew you would be, not because of talent, though you have that, but because of character. You carry people. That is who you are. If you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me. One call. That is all it takes. You saved my life when every rule said to leave me. I will never forget, and I will never stop being grateful. Whatever challenges you face, remember you will never be alone. With deepest respect, General Harold Patterson." Nate had kept that letter in his flight bag ever since. Not for sentimentality, but for reminder. A reminder of what he was capable of. A reminder that integrity was not always rewarded immediately, but it was always remembered. Patterson now sat on the FAA Oversight Committee. His influence extended into corridors of power that Sandra Whitfield could not imagine. His gratitude had never faded. And when Nate had called Victor Reyes 15 minutes ago when Protocol Cardinal had been activated, one of the first people notified was a retired general who still walked with a cane and still remembered being carried through a desert. Back at Gate C-17, Nate stood in the center of a storm that would have broken lesser men. Bradley Thornton had retreated in humiliation. Sandra's confidence was cracking. Mercer's authority was unraveling. But Nate's calm had never wavered because his calm was not passivity. It was the stillness of a man who had walked through fire and survived. The composure of someone who had carried 200 pounds of wounded hope across 3 miles of hostile terrain. They thought they were dealing with a pilot they could intimidate. They were dealing with a soldier who had earned his dignity in blood and sand. Tommy's question echoed one more time in Nate's mind. Is that man a bad guy? No, son. He is not. But the people trying to destroy him, they were about to learn exactly what it costs to underestimate someone who never leaves anyone behind. Security's grip on Nate's arm tightened as they began to guide him away from the gate. The crowd watched in uncomfortable silence, some ashamed, some curious, some already composing the social media posts that would define this moment. Sandra Whitfield stood her ground at the jet bridge entrance, arms crossed, satisfaction radiating from her like heat from pavement in summer. "This is what happens," she announced to no one in particular, and everyone within earshot when people try to be something they are not. Nate heard her. He filed the words away with all the others' evidence stacking upon evidence, a case building itself with every syllable she spoke. "I would like to make a phone call," he said to the lead officer. His voice remained even untouched by the circumstances. "I have that right." The officer hesitated. Making phone calls during security incidents was not standard procedure, but refusing a reasonable request from someone who remained completely calm and cooperative was not standard procedure either. Nate had given them nothing, no resistance, no hostility, no behavior that could justify escalation. "Make it quick," the officer said finally. Nate nodded. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, telegraphing every movement, giving them no reason to claim he had reached for anything threatening, and withdrew a slim black phone. Not his personal device. Something different. Something issued by an office most people did not know existed. He dialed a number he had memorized 2 years ago on the day he first agreed to become a witness to an industry's hidden failures. It rang once. Half of a second ring. Nate. Victor Reyes's voice was sharp, alert, ready, as if he had been waiting for this exact call. "What is happening, Victor? It is happening. Activate Protocol Cardinal." A brief pause. The sound of fingers already moving across a keyboard. Location Boston Logan. Gate C-17. Atlantic Sky Airlines Flight 1947. Timeline: I am being escorted by security now. No verification of my credentials. Flight attendant tore my authorization without checking it. The entire incident is recorded. Victor's voice dropped lower, harder. "Are you safe? I am cooperating fully. No incidents. Good. Stay that way." The keyboard sounds intensified. FAA notified. Recording sealed under Federal Aviation Regulation 14 CFR 13.226. Liaison from the DOT Task Force is being contacted now. I am dispatching someone from my firm to Logan. Timeline 20 minutes. Maybe 15. Nate allowed himself a breath. "I can hold for 15. Nate. Victor's voice carried something beyond professional urgency, the concern of a friend, the solidarity of a fellow veteran. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, you have already won. The evidence is secured. They just do not know it yet. I know, but I want them to see it happen. They will. Everyone will." A pause. "Stand tall, brother. Always." Nate ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Sandra, who had watched the exchange with growing suspicion, let out a sharp laugh. Calling your lawyer, that is your plan. Let me tell you something, lawyers do not scare this airline. We have entire floors of lawyers. Whatever ambulance chaser you have got on speed dial, we will bury them in paperwork before they file a single motion. Nate turned to look at her. Really look at her for the first time. He took in the pressed uniform, the perfect hair, the confidence built on foundations she could not see crumbling beneath her feet. I was not calling a lawyer, he said simply. Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the complete absence of fear, made Sandra's smirk falter. Just for a moment. Just enough to reveal the first crack in her manufactured authority. Then who she demanded. Nate did not answer. He simply turned back to the security officers. Hands visible, posture relaxed, the picture of cooperation. But in the watching crowd, something shifted. Derek Sullivan had captured the entire phone call on video. Not the words, but the body language. The calm. The control. The unmistakable sense that they were all witnessing a turning point they did not yet understand. He has got something, Derek murmured to himself, still recording. That guy has got something, and she has no idea what is coming. Rosa crossed herself and squeezed Tommy's hand. James Crawford, who had watched the powerful protect each other for 4 decades, felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. And 15 minutes away, resources were mobilizing that would reduce Sandra Whitfield's entire world to rubble. The storm had been given a name. Now it was time to make landfall. First Officer Ryan Mitchell was reviewing the pre-flight checklist in the crew lounge when his phone buzzed. A text from Atlantic Sky Dispatch. Delay on 1847. Security situation at gate. Report immediately. Ryan frowned. Security situations at gates usually meant unruly passengers or weather complications causing crowd management issues, but something about the terse phrasing made his stomach tighten. He gathered his flight bag and walked quickly through the terminal, weaving through holiday travelers with their wrapped packages and their anticipatory smiles. December 22nd, 3 days until Christmas. Everyone was trying to get somewhere to be with someone, and Ryan's job was to get them there safely, a responsibility he never took lightly. What he saw when he arrived at gate C-17 stopped him cold. Captain Nathaniel Brooks, the captain he had briefed with just 2 hours ago, the man he had looked up to since his first days at Atlantic Sky, the pilot whose reputation had inspired Ryan to pursue aviation in the first place, was surrounded by security officers, hands visible, posture compliant, the very image of dignity under assault. And standing behind security arms crossed with an expression of smug satisfaction was Sandra Whitfield. Ryan knew Sandra. Everyone in the Atlantic Sky crew network knew Sandra. Not because she was exemplary, but because she was dangerous. Complaints followed her like shadows, whispered concerns about her treatment of certain crew members, certain passengers, certain pilots. Nothing ever stuck. Someone high up always made the complaints disappear, but Ryan had never seen her in action. Until now. He pushed through the gathered crowd, his first officer wings catching the light as he moved. What exactly is happening here? Sandra turned, her expression shifting from satisfaction to annoyance at the interruption. First Officer Mitchell, this does not concern you. We have a security situation. That man is my captain. Ryan's voice carried more force than he usually allowed. Whatever is happening absolutely concerns me. This man, Sandra emphasized the word with disdain, claims to be assigned to Flight 1947. His documentation was suspicious. I reported it. Suspicious how the badges, the authorization codes, everything felt off. I have an instinct for these things. Ryan looked at Nate. 22 years of service, 14,200 flight hours. Known throughout the industry as the Storm Walker for his legendary ability to land safely in conditions that grounded other pilots. This was the man Sandra's instincts found suspicious. Captain Brooks Ryan said, stepping closer to his commanding officer. I performed pre-flight briefing with you at 1100 hours. I watched you file the flight plan. I have your documentation in my records. Nate nodded slightly. I know. I was there. Ryan turned to the security officers. Officers, this man is exactly who he says he is. I can verify his identity, his credentials, and his assignment to this flight. The lead officer looked uncertain. Conflicting testimony from airline personnel was not something they encountered often. Miss Whitfield has filed a report. I am filing a counter-report. Ryan pulled out his own phone. Right now, Captain Nathaniel Brooks is the assigned commander of Atlantic Sky Flight 1847. His credentials are legitimate. Any suggestion otherwise is factually incorrect. Sandra's face flushed red. You are making a serious mistake, Mitchell. Taking sides against documented concerns could have consequences for your career. And false accusations against a decorated captain could have consequences for yours. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. More phones had appeared. The situation that Sandra had clearly intended to handle quietly was rapidly becoming public spectacle. Ryan did not back down. He stepped forward, positioning himself beside his captain, a physical declaration of solidarity that could not be misinterpreted. I have flown with Captain Brooks twice, he continued. Both times I trusted him with my life. Both times he delivered everyone safely to their destination. Whatever instinct you are operating on, Miss Whitfield, it is not based on facts. From the crowd, a murmur of approval rippled outward. Rosa Delgado whispered something to her grandson. Derek Sullivan zoomed his camera in on Ryan's face, the young pilot who had just risked his career for his captain. Sofia Morales was already typing. First officer just stood by his captain. This is what allyship looks like. Hashtag Gate C-17. Sandra's composure was cracking. The situation was slipping beyond her control, and she could feel it. Regional Operations has been notified, she said, her voice rising. My supervisor is on his way. He will clarify exactly who has authority here. I look forward to that clarification. Ryan's tone was ice. Because I am confident it will confirm what I already know. Captain Brooks is our pilot, his credentials are valid, and this entire incident should never have happened. Sandra opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time since she had torn those documents, she looked uncertain. Nate placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. Thank you, First Officer Mitchell. Your support is noted and appreciated. It is not support, sir. Ryan met his captain's eyes with steady conviction. It is the truth. The terminal around them continued its holiday bustle, announcements calling flights. Children asking parents when they would arrive, the endless movement of people trying to get home. But at Gate C-17 time seemed to have stopped. The confrontation had reached an impasse, and everyone present could feel that something larger was building. Something that would change more than just this flight. Something that would change careers, expose patterns, and force an industry to confront what it had spent years trying to ignore. Douglas Mercer was on his way. The FAA was on its way. And the truth, that patient, powerful force that Sandra had tried to bury beneath prejudice and procedure, was closer than any of them knew. The black SUV pulled up to Terminal C's VIP entrance with the quiet arrogance of authority expecting to be obeyed. Before it had fully stopped, the rear door opened and Douglas Mercer emerged, his Burberry overcoat flowing behind him like a cape, his silver hair sculpted with the precision of a man who considered appearance a weapon. Regional Operations Director, 54 years old, 3 decades with Atlantic Sky in positions of increasing power and decreasing accountability. Douglas Mercer was the kind of executive who had learned to speak in euphemisms to dress discrimination in the language of policy to protect the company's interests while protecting himself even more carefully. He had received Sandra's call 12 minutes ago. The message had been simple situation at Gate C-17, captain's credentials questioned, security involved. Between the lines, he had heard what she really meant. Another one of those pilots causing problems, another fire that needed to be quietly extinguished. He had done this before, 3 times by his precise recollection. Each time the complaints had vanished. Each time the pilot had moved on, demoted, transferred, or simply broken by the weight of fighting against structures designed to exhaust them into silence. This time would be no different. Mercer strode through the terminal with the confidence of a man walking into a room he believed he already controlled. Security parted for him instinctively. Passengers glanced up at the figure radiating executive authority. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" When he arrived at Gate C-17, he took in the scene with practiced assessment. His flight attendant standing firm security maintaining perimeter, the pilot surrounded but not yet removed. Good. Containable. The presence of witnesses was suboptimal, but witnesses could be managed. What he did not register, what his experience had never taught him to notice, was the number of phones pointed in his direction. The quiet documentation that had been building since Sandra first tore those credentials. The evidence accumulating like water behind a dam. "Captain Brooks." Mercer's voice was silk over steel, smooth surface hardcore. "I understand there has been some concern about your documentation today." Nate met his gaze without flinching. "There has been no concern about my documentation. My documentation is valid. What there has been is an accusation made without verification, credentials destroyed without cause, and security called without basis." Mercer's smile did not reach his eyes. "I am sure there has been a misunderstanding. Miss Whitfield is one of our most experienced crew members. If she raised concerns, she had reasons. Her reason was that pilots do not look like me. Those were her exact words. I am certain that is a mischaracterization. It is on video." Ryan stepped forward, still standing beside his captain. "I can have it sent to your email in 30 seconds. Mercer's expression flickered, barely perceptible, quickly controlled. He had not known about the video. That was a variable he would need to address. "First Officer Mitchell," he said, his tone shifting to something that might have been interpreted as fatherly concern but carried an unmistakable edge. "You should be careful. Taking sides in internal matters can have implications. I am not taking sides in an internal matter. I am confirming facts. Captain Brooks is our assigned commander. His credentials are legitimate. Those are facts, not sides." Sandra pushed forward, emboldened by Mercer's presence. "Mr. Mercer, this man's documentation did not match what I expected. The authorization codes looked wrong. His badge felt suspicious. I followed my instincts to protect the aircraft." "Your instincts," Nate repeated. Based on what exactly? Sandra's mouth opened, then closed. The question had a clear answer, but she could not say it out loud. Not with cameras recording, not with witnesses watching. Mercer stepped smoothly into the silence. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private. I am sure we can reach a resolution without unnecessary public attention." "I prefer public attention." Nate's voice was calm but immovable. "Public attention ensures accuracy. Public attention ensures accountability. If Atlantic Sky's procedures are as sound as you believe them to be, public attention should not concern you." For a long moment, Mercer simply looked at him, assessed him, tried to categorize him the way he had categorized dozens of others over the years. Troublemakers, malcontents, pilots who did not understand how the industry really worked. But something in Nate's eyes resisted categorization. The absolute calm. The complete absence of desperation. The certainty of a man who was not fighting for recognition but something far more dangerous, justice. Captain Brooks Mercer said finally, "I want to be clear about the situation. Miss Whitfield has raised concerns about your fitness to fly today." "Fitness. I was fine until she tore my credentials. She has documented erratic behavior, hostility toward crew, refusal to comply with security procedures." Ryan's incredulity burst out. "That is impossible. I was with him this morning. None of that happened." Mercer raised a hand, the gesture of a man accustomed to silencing inconvenient voices. "First Officer Mitchell, your loyalty to your captain is admirable. But you should consider whether that loyalty is well placed before it damages your own career." The threat was barely disguised. Ryan felt it land the implication that his future at Atlantic Sky depended on his willingness to betray his captain. He did not hesitate. "My loyalty is to the truth, and the truth is that Captain Brooks has done nothing wrong." "The truth," Mercer repeated, his tone suggesting the word was quaint, outdated. "Is that what we are discussing? Because I have a documented report? A report filed 25 minutes before any incident occurred." The voice came from the crowd, Derek Sullivan still recording, unable to stay silent. I saw the timestamp on her tablet. She wrote that complaint before anything happened, before he even arrived at the gate. Mercer turned slowly toward the interruption. "I am sorry, who are you, Derek Sullivan?" "Tech entrepreneur, founder of Sullivan Media Group." He held up his phone. "And the person who has been recording everything since your flight attendant said pilots do not look like you. Want to see the footage?" For the first time, genuine concern crossed Mercer's face. Pre-written reports, video evidence, public witnesses. This was not the controllable situation he had walked into expecting to manage. Sandra's face had gone pale. She had not known about the timestamp issue, or more precisely, she had not thought anyone would notice. The report had been prepared in advance, ready to deploy whenever the opportunity arose. It was how she and Mercer had handled situations before. A pattern, a method, a trap that had worked perfectly until now. I think Mercer said carefully, "We need to take this discussion to a more appropriate venue." "The administration wing has conference rooms, I think," Nate interrupted. "We wait exactly where we are. I made a phone call 15 minutes ago. The people I called should be arriving very soon." "People? What people?" Nate did not answer. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, posture relaxed, the picture of patient confidence. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Something about this was not adding up. This pilot was not behaving the way targets usually behaved. There was no desperation, no pleading, no attempts at negotiation. There was only that unshakable calm, the stillness of a man who knew something Mercer did not. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Douglas Mercer felt the cold touch of uncertainty. The balance of power, which had always tilted so reliably in his direction, was beginning to shift. He just did not know how far it would tip before it crushed everything he had built. Rosa Delgado had lived through 71 years of watching injustice pass unchallenged. Growing up in Texas, she had learned young that speaking up came with costs her family often could not afford. But she had also learned through teaching 42 years of elementary school that silence was its own kind of violence. Every time you did not speak, you taught someone that their suffering did not matter. Today at Gate C-17, surrounded by holiday travelers and Christmas decorations, she decided that 71 years of silence was enough. She rose from her seat, her small frame straightening with the determination of a woman who had finally found the line she would not allow to be crossed. Tommy's hand slipped from hers as she moved forward, though he stayed close behind her, watching his grandmother transform into something he had never seen before. "Excuse me," her voice cut through the tension like a blade wrapped in silk, soft but sharp. "Excuse me, I have something to say." Douglas Mercer turned toward her with the expression of a man being interrupted by something he considered far beneath his attention. "Ma'am, this is an internal airline matter. Do not call me ma'am like that." Rosa's accent deepened with her intensity. "I am Rosa Delgado. I taught school for 42 years. I raised 3 children. I have buried a husband and outlived more politicians than I can count. And I know a bully when I see one." She pointed at Sandra. "I watched this woman tear that man's credentials before she checked anything. I watched her call security before he said a word that could be called hostile. I watched her file a report on a tablet when nothing had happened yet. Her finger swung to Mercer. And I watched you walk in here like you own the truth itself, threatening a young man for defending his captain. Mrs. Delgado, miss, my husband is dead. I do not need his name for authority anymore. Rosa stepped closer, her eyes blazing. I have been silent too many times in my life. When they told my students they would not amount to anything because of where they came from. When they told my daughters they could not be engineers because girls do not do math. When they told my husband he would never make foreman because the good jobs were not for his kind. Her voice cracked but held. Every time I stayed quiet, I lost a piece of myself. Today I take it back. Tommy moved to stand beside his grandmother, his small hand finding hers again. Yeah, he added, his voice piping clear and young. The pilot did not do anything wrong. I saw it. From across the gate area, James Crawford felt something break loose inside him. Something that had been frozen for decades, locked away behind the professional neutrality that had allowed him to rise through airline ranks while watching injustice unfold and doing nothing about it. His wife's voice echoed in his memory. When will you stop being a bystander? James Louise had asked him that question after he had told her about Captain David Moreno, a pilot Crawford had known personally. A man whose career had been destroyed by complaints that never quite made sense from sources that were never quite named. Crawford had watched it happen. He had even suspected who was behind it, and he had said nothing done, nothing protected, nothing but his own position. Louise had looked at him with disappointment that night. Not anger, that would have been easier. Just quiet disappointment from the woman who had believed he was better than he was. She had died last spring, leaving him alone with Christmas approaching and 4 decades of silence weighing on his conscience. He pushed through the crowd, his expensive suit and silver hair drawing attention as he moved. I would like to add something to the record, he announced. Mercer recognized him immediately. James Crawford, former executive at a competing airline, industry veteran, the kind of man whose voice carried weight in boardrooms and regulatory meetings. Mr. Crawford Mercer set his tone, modulating toward respect. I did not realize you were traveling with us today. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. I spent 40 years in this industry, Douglas. Crawford's use of the first name was deliberate, a reminder that they occupied the same level that Mercer's authority did not extend to him. 40 years of watching exactly what is happening right now. Pilots questioned. Careers destroyed. Complaints that appear from nowhere and disappear when convenient. He turned to face the crowd. I stayed silent every single time. I told myself it was not my place, was not my business, was not my fight. I let good people get ground up by a machine I helped maintain through my silence. His gaze found Nate. I am sorry. I am sorry to you. And I am sorry to everyone like you that I failed by staying quiet. He turned back to Mercer. But I am done being a bystander. If there is an investigation into what happened here today, and I suspect there will be, I want it known that I am willing to testify about this incident and about patterns I have observed throughout my career. The word patterns landed with visible impact. Mercer's jaw tightened. Sandra's already pale face went ghost white. From near the window, Sophia Morales had been threading the entire incident on social media, her medical training giving her an eye for detail that made her posts precise and devastating. Thread. What I am witnessing at Gate C-17 Boston Logan. This is Captain Nathaniel Brooks, 22 years with the airline, decorated military veteran. Being detained right now because a flight attendant did not trust his documents. She tore his credentials, before checking them, before calling dispatch, before any verification at all. His first officer confirmed his identity. She did not care. The regional director arrived and immediately started threatening people for defending him. And now, this is incredible. A retired airline executive just publicly apologized for a career of staying silent about discrimination he witnessed. In front of everyone, with cameras rolling. I am a medical resident. I have been asked if I am really a doctor more times than I can count. I know this feeling. I know this pattern. But I have never seen anything like what is happening here. Hashtag Gate C17. Hashtag Justice for Captain Brooks. The thread was being retweeted faster than Sophia could track. Aviation accounts were picking it up. News outlets were starting to pay attention. The hashtag Gate C17 began climbing regional trending lists. Derek Sullivan, still recording, panned across the faces of the crowd. He captured Rosa standing firm with Tommy at her side. He captured James Crawford, distinguished and determined, publicly burning bridges he had spent decades building. He captured Sophia typing furiously, her thread becoming a real-time document of witness testimony. And he captured Nate standing in the center of it all, his calm, unbroken, his dignity intact. This is history, Derek murmured to himself. This is actual history happening in real time. Mercer looked at Sandra. She looked back at him, and for the first time he saw fear in her eyes. The situation had spiraled far beyond anything they had anticipated. Their method, the quiet complaints, the private resolutions, the patterns that no one ever connected, was being exposed in the most public way possible. Perhaps Mercer said, his voice strained in ways it had never been during previous situations. We should wait for proper authorities to arrive before proceeding further. They are already on their way, Nate said. I told you that 15 minutes ago. What authorities? Who exactly did you call? Nate smiled, the first expression other than calm neutrality he had shown since the confrontation began. It was not a triumphant smile or a vindictive one. It was the smile of a man watching a trap close around people who had never imagined they could be caught. You will see soon enough. Through the terminal windows, 2 black SUVs were pulling up to the terminal entrance. Bradley Thornton had been watching the spectacle at Gate C17 with growing impatience. The 56-year-old private equity executive had a meeting in Miami, scheduled for 9 o'clock the following morning, a deal worth $40 million that required his physical presence. Every minute of delay was costing him money, or at least the opportunity for money, which to Bradley was the same thing. He had achieved his platinum status through ruthless accumulation of flight miles, treating airline loyalty programs the same way he treated everything else, as systems to be exploited for maximum personal benefit. First-class upgrades, lounge access, priority boarding. These were the perks that separated people like him from the masses shuffling through economy. And now those masses were watching a pilot cause a scene, and no one was doing anything about it. Bradley adjusted his cashmere overcoat and stepped forward from the first-class boarding area. He had dealt with difficult situations before: hostile takeovers, union negotiations, regulatory challenges. This was nothing, just a matter of applying pressure in the right places. Douglas, he said, approaching Mercer with the easy familiarity of men who occupied similar social strata. I golf with your CEO. Robert and I were at Pebble Beach together last month. I am sure he would be interested to know how long this situation is taking to resolve. Mercer's demeanor shifted instantly, shoulders lowering slightly, chin dipping in an unconscious display of deference. Mr. Thornton, I apologize for the inconvenience. We are working to resolve this as quickly as possible. Then resolve it. Bradley gestured dismissively toward Nate. The gentleman clearly does not belong here. Get a real captain and let us get this flight in the air. Ryan Mitchell stepped forward, his professional composure tested by the casual cruelty of Bradley's words. He is a real captain, one of the best in the industry. Bradley's eyes slid over Ryan like he was evaluating a disappointing investment. I do not believe I was speaking to you. He turned back to Mercer. What is the hold-up? Security situations happen. Remove the problem and move on. Nate spoke for the first time since Bradley's arrival. I am not a problem. I am a pilot who showed up to do his job." Bradley turned to face him fully, and something ugly flashed across his features. The look of a man accustomed to people he considered beneath him staying silent in his presence. "Let me be clear about something," Bradley said, his voice carrying the practiced condescension of boardrooms where he always held the power. "I do not care about your credentials, your uniform, or whatever story you are trying to sell. I care about getting to Miami. And if that requires removing obstacles, I expect obstacles to be removed. I am not an obstacle. I am the captain of your flight. You are a delay. And delays cost money." Bradley reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card. He did not hand it to Nate. That would have implied equality. Instead, he dropped it at Nate's feet, letting it flutter to the floor like discarded trash. "When you are done playing dress-up," Bradley said, "do not bother looking for work in any industry I touch. I have connections in aviation, hospitality, transportation. One word from me and doors close. Understand?" Rosa Delgado's voice rang out. "Did you just threaten that man in front of all these people?" Bradley did not even glance in her direction. "I am stating facts. Some people belong in certain positions. Others do not. It is not personal. It is just how the world works. It is how your world works." Rosa stepped forward, her small frame radiating fury. "The rest of us are trying to build something better." Tommy tugged at her hand. "Grandma, who is that mean man? Someone who has too much money and not enough humanity, mijo?" Bradley's lip curled in annoyance at the interruption. He pulled a pen from his pocket, scribbled something on another business card, and held it up so Nate could see. "Career advice," he said with a smirk. "Consider it a gift." He dropped this card at Nate's feet as well. Rosa, moving faster than anyone expected, darted forward and picked it up. She read the words aloud, her voice carrying across the silent gate area. "Maybe try bus driving. Better fit for your type." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The words hung in the air, naked prejudice stripped of its usual disguises displayed for everyone to witness. Derek's camera zoomed in on the card, capturing the handwriting. The words the evidence of what Bradley Thornton truly believed. Sophia was already typing. Platinum passenger just dropped a card at the captain's feet. Told him to try bus driving. Called it career advice. His name is Bradley Thornton. Private equity. Hashtag Gate C17. James Crawford shook his head slowly. "I have known men like you my entire career. I have golfed with you. I have closed deals with you, and I watched you destroy people while calling it business." Bradley's confidence flickered for the first time. "This is none of your concern, Crawford. It has been my concern for 40 years. I just refuse to see it." Crawford's voice hardened. "Your business card is going to be famous after today, not for the reasons you intended." Nate bent slowly and picked up both cards from the floor. He examined them with the same methodical calm he had maintained throughout the entire confrontation. "Thank you for this," he said to Bradley. "Excuse me, this card, these words, better fit for your type." Nate tucked the cards carefully into his pocket. "Evidence of intent is usually harder to obtain. You just handed it to me in your own handwriting." Bradley's face reddened. "That is not, I did not mean." "You meant exactly what you wrote. You always do. Men like you say things out loud that others think in silence because you believe your wealth protects you from consequences." Nate's eyes met Bradley's with unwavering steadiness. "I have flown combat missions over Baghdad. I have landed planes in hurricanes. I have saved lives while men in expensive coats told me I did not belong." He stepped closer, not threatening but present, unavoidable. "I do not need to try bus driving, Mr. Thornton, but I suspect you will need to try something new after today. Your investors, your board, your country club, they are all going to see exactly who you are. Not the version you present in boardrooms. The real version. The one that writes better fit for your type on business cards." Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For once, his practiced confidence had abandoned him. Around them, the crowd's mood had shifted from shock to anger. People who had been uncertain about taking sides were no longer uncertain. Bradley Thornton had made everything clear, simple, and undeniable. Rosa looked down at Tommy. "Do you see, mijo? That is what happens when someone has money but no soul. Remember this. Remember what it looks like." Tommy nodded solemnly, his young eyes fixed on Bradley with the unfiltered judgment of childhood. And somewhere in the growing buzz of the crowd, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then joined by others, until a wave of applause rolled through Gate C-17. Applause for a pilot who had stood tall, and condemnation for a man who had revealed exactly what he was. Bradley Thornton retreated toward the first-class boarding area, his expensive coat suddenly feeling like a costume that no longer fit. The child's question echoed in Nate's mind. Is that man a bad guy, and pulled him back to a moment 15 years distant, half a world away, where sand and blood had forged the man he had become? November 2009, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Lieutenant Nathaniel Brooks was at the controls of a UH-60 Blackhawk, the aircraft slicing through dawn air that still held the night's cold. Below, the terrain scrolled past in browns and grays rocks, and the occasional cluster of compounds that might be friendly, hostile, or abandoned. Intelligence had cleared their flight path 6 hours earlier. The briefing had called it routine. Routine was a word that meant nothing in a war zone. They were transporting a VIP General Harold Patterson, 3 stars Deputy Commander of Coalition Operations. The general was returning from a forward base to regional headquarters, a flight of 40 minutes that should have been unremarkable in every way. At 23 minutes, the world exploded. The surface-to-air missile came from nowhere, a streak of fire that appeared in Nate's peripheral vision half a second before it caught the tail rotor with mechanical precision. The impact shook through the aircraft like a giant's fist, alarms screaming, controls fighting his hands, the horizon spinning toward them with lethal intent. Nate fought. Years of training, thousands of hours of instinct, the desperate will to survive, all of it channeled into his grip on the cyclic and collective. He could feel the Black Hawk dying around him, feel the physics that wanted to turn them into a crater, feel death reaching for everyone on board. He would not let it have them. The auto-rotation was textbook, or would have been if textbooks covered auto-rotations performed while a tail rotor disintegrated and smoke poured into the cockpit. Nate picked a landing zone by instinct more than vision, a flat stretch of rocky ground that might not kill them on impact. They hit hard. Metal screamed. Dust exploded around them in a choking cloud. Something in Nate's shoulder wrenched, sending fire down his arm. But his hands stayed on the controls until the aircraft stopped moving, until the rotors had spun down, until silence replaced chaos. For a moment, no one moved. 4 crew members. 1 general. 5 lives that should have ended in twisted metal and jet fuel fire. Then the moaning started. General Patterson was pinned in his seat, his left leg twisted at an angle that made Nate's stomach lurch. Blood was already pooling beneath him. Arterial blood, the bright red kind that meant minutes, not hours. His face was gray with shock and pain, but his eyes found Nate's with the clarity of a man who understood exactly how bad things were. Lieutenant Patterson managed through gritted teeth. The radio Nate checked. Destroyed. The impact had shattered the communication array. They were cut off invisible 30 kilometers from the nearest friendly position, and according to his mental map, the nearest enemy patrol was approximately 15 minutes away. Co-pilot Lieutenant James Wheeler, his face cut by shattered glass, was already moving toward the rear of the aircraft. "We need to move. They will have seen us go down." Sergeant Carlos Mendez, the crew chief, was helping Specialist Amy Foster extract herself from her jump seat. Both were rattled but mobile. That left only the general. Nate knelt beside Patterson and assessed the injury with the quick efficiency of combat medical training. The leg was shattered, multiple fractures, blood loss, significant, but not yet critical. With proper care, he would survive. Without it, he had maybe 2 hours. The problem was movement. Patterson was 200 pounds of wounded senior officer. Moving him would be agony for him, and a massive burden for whoever carried him. Protocol said to stabilize him here and send the mobile crew for help. Protocol said that in situations like this, you saved the most people possible, which meant prioritizing those who could walk. Protocol said to leave him. Nate looked at the general, this man he had only read about in briefings, this mythology in uniform, who was now bleeding out in the wreckage of a helicopter Nate had failed to protect. Lieutenant Patterson said, reading Nate's face, "I am ordering you to get the crew to safety. Leave me." "That is a direct order. With respect, sir, I am going to disobey that order." Nate stood and called to the others. "Wheeler, you have got point. Mendez and Foster cover our 6. We are moving east toward the extraction corridor. 3 miles. Wheeler's eyes went wide. 3 miles carrying the general, that is possible. Move out. Nate crouched and lifted Patterson onto his back in a fireman's carry. The general groaned a sound of pure agony that he tried to strangle into silence. 200 pounds of wounded authority settled onto Nate's shoulders, and he felt his muscles scream in protest. He started walking anyway. The terrain was brutal, rocks that cut through boots, sand that sucked at every step, the sun rising to pour heat onto them like a punishment. Every step sent jolts of pain through Nate's wrenched shoulder, through his straining back, through legs that wanted to buckle and refused only because he refused to let them. Behind them, distant shouts suggested the enemy had found the crash site. The clock was running. Lieutenant Patterson whispered, his voice ragged. "You are going to get yourself killed. That is my choice to make, sir. It is not worth it. Not for one man." Nate adjusted his grip and kept walking. "Every man is worth it, General. Every single one." The 3 miles took 97 minutes. 97 minutes of walking, sometimes stumbling, occasionally crawling when the terrain demanded it. 97 minutes of carrying a man who outranked him by light years through territory that wanted them dead, toward a hope of rescue that grew thinner with every step. They reached the extraction corridor with 2 minutes to spare. The QRF found them there, 5 figures staggering out of the dust, one barely conscious, all alive. Against every odd, against every protocol, against every voice that whispered about acceptable losses and difficult choices. They were alive because Nate had refused to leave anyone behind. Patterson survived. 18 months of surgery and rehabilitation rebuilt his leg, if not perfectly. He walked with a cane for the rest of his life, a reminder of the day a young pilot had carried him out of hell. The general never forgot. A year after Nate transitioned to commercial aviation, a handwritten letter arrived at his home. The envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting inside was precise and military. "Lieutenant Brooks, I have followed your career with great interest. You have become exactly the pilot I knew you would be, not because of talent, though you have that, but because of character. You carry people. That is who you are. If you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me. One call. That is all it takes. You saved my life when every rule said to leave me. I will never forget, and I will never stop being grateful. Whatever challenges you face, remember you will never be alone. With deepest respect, General Harold Patterson." Nate had kept that letter in his flight bag ever since. Not for sentimentality, but for reminder. A reminder of what he was capable of. A reminder that integrity was not always rewarded immediately, but it was always remembered. Patterson now sat on the FAA Oversight Committee. His influence extended into corridors of power that Sandra Whitfield could not imagine. His gratitude had never faded. And when Nate had called Victor Reyes 15 minutes ago, when Protocol Cardinal had been activated, One of the first people notified was a retired general who still walked with a cane and still remembered being carried through a desert. Back at gate C-17, Nate stood in the center of a storm that would have broken lesser men. Bradley Thornton had retreated in humiliation. Sandra's confidence was cracking. Mercer's authority was unraveling. But Nate's calm had never wavered, because his calm was not passivity. It was the stillness of a man who had walked through fire and survived. The composure of someone who had carried 200 pounds of wounded hope across 3 miles of hostile terrain. They thought they were dealing with a pilot they could intimidate. They were dealing with a soldier who had earned his dignity in blood and sand. Tommy's question echoed one more time in Nate's mind. Is that man a bad guy? No, son. He is not. But the people trying to destroy him. They were about to learn exactly what it costs to underestimate someone who never leaves anyone behind. Elena Vasquez had been standing at the jet bridge entrance for the past 20 minutes watching her career considerations war with her conscience. She was 27 years old, a junior flight attendant with Atlantic Sky for barely 18 months. This was her first holiday flight, a coveted assignment that she had earned through exemplary performance and careful navigation of the airline's complex social hierarchies. She knew Sandra Whitfield. Everyone in the Atlantic Sky Crew network knew Sandra. The senior flight attendant had a reputation that traveled through whisper networks and cautious warnings: do not cross her, do not question her, do not be on the wrong side of her when she decides someone does not belong. Elena had seen Sandra target people before. Small cruelties wrapped in procedural language complaints filed against crew members who made the mistake of challenging her or simply being the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. But those incidents had been private, manageable, the kind of thing you learned to navigate if you wanted to survive. This was different. This was public. This was a captain in full uniform being humiliated in front of hundreds of people, and Elena had watched it happen from the beginning. She had seen Sandra tear those credentials without checking them. She had seen the timestamp on Sandra's tablet when she filed the report, time-stamped before Captain Brooks had even arrived at the gate. She had heard the words that started it all: pilots do not look like you. And she had stayed silent. The silence was eating her alive. Her grandfather's face appeared in her memory. Manuel Vasquez, who had come to America from Guatemala with nothing but determination and an unshakable belief that hard work could build anything. He had worked 3 jobs simultaneously so that Elena's mother could attend college. He had endured indignities she could barely imagine, always with his head held high, always believing that the next generation would inherit a better world. You stand for something, mija, he used to tell her. Or you stand for nothing. There is no middle ground. He had died 2 years ago, and Elena had given the eulogy at his funeral, promising to honor his legacy by living with the same integrity he had modeled. She had not honored that promise today. Elena. Sandra's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Stop daydreaming and get back in the cabin. This situation is being handled. Something shifted in Elena's chest. A decision crystallized. No. The word came out before she could reconsider, before the calculations of career consequences could override the clarity of conscience. Sandra turned slowly, her expression frozen in disbelief. In 12 years at Atlantic Sky, subordinate crew members did not say no to her. They apologized. They complied. They survived by submission. Excuse me. Elena stepped forward away from the jet bridge toward the confrontation she had been avoiding. Her voice trembled initially but steadied as she found her words. I saw everything, Sandra. I watched you tear his credentials before you verified anything. I saw you file the report before the incident even happened. I saw the timestamp on your tablet. Mercer's attention snapped to her. Miss Vasquez, you should be very careful about making accusations. I am not making accusations. I am stating what I witnessed. Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. The captain arrived at the gate. He presented his credentials. Sandra took them, made a face like she was looking at something dirty, and tore them in half. No verification, no call to dispatch, no attempt to check the system. She looked at Nate for the first time since beginning to speak. "I am sorry, Captain. I should have said something immediately. I was afraid of what it would cost me." "What changed?" Nate asked quietly. Elena's eyes glistened. "I thought about my grandfather. He spent his whole life being treated like he did not belong. He never complained. He just worked harder." She turned back to face Sandra and Mercer. "He told me to stand for something or stand for nothing. I have been standing for nothing too long." Sandra's face contorted with fury. "You are throwing away your career for this. For a pilot you have never met. I am not throwing away anything. I am finally becoming the person I promised my grandfather I would be." Rosa, watching from the crowd, whispered to Tommy, "That is a brave girl, mijo. That is what courage looks like." Derek's camera captured Elena's face, the fear still visible but overcome by something stronger. Determination. Integrity. The decision to be better than circumstances demanded. Sophia added to her thread, junior flight attendant, just broke ranks. Confirmed the report was filed before the incident. Confirmed credentials were torn without verification. She is shaking, but she is standing. Hashtag Gate C17. James Crawford nodded slowly. "I wish I had had your courage 30 years ago," he said to Elena. "I could have made a difference back then." "You are making one now." Mercer's jaw tightened. His network of protection was crumbling. Sandra, Bradley, Elena's testimony, the witnesses, the cameras, every layer of control he had built over years was unraveling in minutes. "Miss Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying an edge that was no longer quite smooth. "You need to understand the consequences of what you are doing." "I understand them perfectly." Elena lifted her chin. "I might lose my job. I might get blacklisted. But I will be able to look at myself in the mirror tomorrow. Can you say the same?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Nate extended his hand toward Elena. "Thank you, Miss Vasquez. Your grandfather would be proud." Elena shook his hand, and something in her expression settled the peace that comes from finally doing the right thing, whatever the cost. He would have done the same thing she said. He would have done it faster. Around them, the mood at Gate C17 had shifted again. What had begun as a confrontation between a pilot and a flight attendant had become something larger, a moment when ordinary people found the courage to stand against ordinary injustice. And the forces mobilizing in response to Protocol Cardinal were now just minutes away. Douglas Mercer had not survived 3 decades in corporate aviation by panicking in difficult situations. He had survived by calculating angles, managing information, and ensuring that inconvenient truths never reached inconvenient places. But standing at Gate C17, watching his carefully constructed arrangements of protection crumble, he felt something unfamiliar desperation. He pulled Sandra aside, his grip on her elbow harder than strictly necessary. They moved a few steps away from the crowd, but Derek's camera followed them, and unknown to either of them, his high-quality microphone captured their whispered exchange. "This is out of control," Mercer hissed. "There are too many witnesses, too many cameras. The usual methods will not work here." Sandra's composure had shattered entirely. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, her voice pitched high with fear she could no longer disguise. "What do we do if they dig into this, if they look at my other reports?" "Shut up." Mercer's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Do not mention the other reports. Do not mention anything." But the words were already out, hanging in the air, captured by a microphone neither of them had noticed. Derek glanced at his phone screen, confirming the audio levels. Other reports. Plural. Pattern. Evidence. He kept recording. Mercer's mind raced through options. Damage control. Containment. Some way to spin this story before it spun out of their control entirely. "We need to file a secondary report," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Something that justifies your initial concern. Something that explains the predated timestamp as a precautionary measure. How everyone saw what happened. There is video. Video can be interpreted. Context can be manufactured." Mercer's eyes darted toward the crowd, toward the phones, toward the fragments of control he was desperately trying to gather. Claim he made threatening statements before the cameras started recording. Claim you felt in immediate danger. Your word against his. But the witnesses. Witnesses remember what they expect to remember. Most people were not paying attention until you called for security. We control the narrative from before that moment. Sandra's tablet appeared in her shaking hands. What do I add? Verbal threats. Aggressive body language. Refusal to comply with crew directives before the public confrontation. Mercer watched her type. Timestamp it for 20 minutes before the incident. Say you tried to handle it quietly, but he escalated. The lies took shape on the screen, each keystroke building a fabricated reality designed to bury the truth. What neither of them knew was that this exact strategy had been anticipated. 9 months earlier, when Nate had agreed to participate in the DOT task force investigation, he had met with Victor Reyes to discuss potential scenarios. They had analyzed how discrimination typically operated in aviation, not through obvious acts that could be easily prosecuted, but through accumulated patterns of complaints reports and documentation that built cases against targeted pilots over time. The cover-up was always the most damning evidence. Nate's recording device had captured everything. Not just Sandra's original words, not just the torn credentials, not just Bradley's handwritten insult, but now Mercer's whispered instructions to fabricate evidence. The conspiracy laid bare in their own voices. Back at the main confrontation, Ryan Mitchell was watching the whispered conference with growing unease. "Captain," he said quietly to Nate, "they are planning something." "I know. Let them. Should we not? Every action they take right now is being documented. Every fabrication they create becomes evidence of intent. The more they try to cover up, the deeper they dig themselves." Nate's voice carried the patient certainty of a man who had seen this moment coming for a long time. Let them dig. Rosa had positioned herself between the crowd and the jet bridge entrance, her small form a symbolic barrier against injustice. Tommy stood beside her, his young face solemn with the gravity he sensed but did not fully understand. "Grandma?" he whispered. "Are the bad guys going to win?" Rosa squeezed his hand. "No, mijo. The bad guys never win forever. Sometimes it takes time for justice to arrive, but it always arrives." James Crawford moved closer to Derek. "You are getting all of this. Every word, including whatever they are whispering over there." "Good." Crawford's expression was grim. "I spent 40 years watching people like Mercer operate. They always think they are untouchable. They always think the rules do not apply to them. Do the rules apply to them?" Crawford looked at Captain Brooks, standing calm in the center of chaos, dignified, despite everything thrown at him, and something shifted in his expression. "They are about to find out." Sandra returned from her conference with Mercer, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. Her face had hardened into something resembling determination, though it looked more like desperation wearing a mask. "I have updated my report," she announced. Her voice strained but loud, to include incidents that occurred before the public confrontation. Threatening statements, aggressive behavior, refusal to comply with crew member directives. Ryan's incredulity burst out. "That is a complete fabrication. I was with Captain Brooks for 3 hours this morning. Nothing like that happened." "Were you with him every second before he arrived at this gate?" Mercer's smooth voice cut in. Do you know what interactions he may have had with crew members in other areas of the terminal? He was reviewing flight plans, checking weather data, doing his job. So, you were not with him every second. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Create doubt, suggest possibilities, let bureaucratic processes do the work of destruction. But Mercer had made one critical miscalculation he did not know about the recording device. He did not know that his whispered instructions to fabricate evidence had been captured with perfect clarity. He did not know that the federal officials now entering the terminal had been briefed on exactly this possibility. Captain Brooks Mercer said, turning toward Nate with the confidence of a man who believed he had regained control given the concerns that have been raised. I am going to recommend that you be removed from this flight pending a full investigation, for the safety of the passengers and crew. Safety. Nate let the word hang in the air. You are concerned about safety. Always. It is our highest priority. Then you should be very concerned about what happens next. Through the terminal windows, 3 figures in federal credentials were approaching the gate. Agent William Foster from the FAA led the group, his expression carrying the weight of authority that did not need volume to be heard. Mercer saw them. His face went pale, because Nate continued. The people I called are not lawyers, Mr. Mercer. They are not airline executives. They are not PR consultants who can help you manage a narrative. He nodded toward the approaching officials. They are the people who investigate when the narrative is a crime. Sandra's tablet slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. The game had changed entirely, and for the first time, Douglas Mercer understood that no amount of calculation, no network of protection, no decades of accumulated power would save him from what was coming. The first video hit 1 million views, while Sandra's fabricated report was still loading on her tablet. Derek Sullivan's footage, 47 minutes of uncut documentation from the moment Sandra had said pilots do not look like you, had been uploaded to every major platform simultaneously. His tech company's infrastructure, normally used for product launches and marketing campaigns, had become a distribution network for witness testimony. The comments section exploded. Wait, is that the Nathaniel Brooks, the Storm Walker? The guy who landed during Hurricane Miranda when every other flight diverted. They messed with the wrong pilot. Did she actually tear his credentials on camera and then file a fake report? Atlantic Sky about to be Atlantic goodbye. I am platinum status with Atlantic Sky. Make that was platinum status. Booking my flights with competitors from now on. I know Captain Brooks. Flew with him twice. This man is one of the most respected pilots in the industry. He once talked a trainee through an emergency landing when her instructor froze. This is disgusting. The hashtag GateC17 began trending nationally at 4:23 p.m. Eastern Time. By 4:47, it was #1 in the United States. By 5:15, international news outlets were picking up the story. Sofia Morales' thread had reached its 32nd installment, Update 32. Federal officials have just arrived at the gate, FAA credentials visible. The regional operations director looks like he is going to be sick. The flight attendant dropped her tablet. Something big is happening. Something very big. Captain Brooks has not moved, has not raised his voice, has not shown anything but perfect composure through this entire ordeal. That is what dignity looks like. Meanwhile, the passengers who witnessed everything are refusing to leave. They want to see how this ends. I want to see how this ends. We all want to see how this ends. Hashtag GateC17. Hashtag Justice for Captain Brooks. Hashtag Stand Tall. The thread was approaching 100,000 retweets. News aggregators had begun compiling the scattered posts into cohesive narratives. Television producers were scrambling to assemble packages for evening broadcasts. But it was the aviation community's response that carried the heaviest weight. Captain Mike Roberts, verified airline veteran with 34 years experience, posted, "I have known Nate Brooks for 20 years. He is the pilot you want in the cockpit when everything goes wrong. If Atlantic Sky lets Sandra Whitfield and Douglas Mercer destroy his career, they will have destroyed their own integrity permanently." Black Pilots Network posted, "Captain Nathaniel Brooks represents everything we strive for. Excellence, dignity, perseverance." What is happening at Gate C-17 is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern, and it is time for that pattern to end. An anonymous account called Flight Attendant Truth posted, "I worked with Sandra Whitfield for 2 years. This is not new. She did this before. To Captain David Moreno, to First Officer James Turner, to Captain William Reyes. She has been doing this for years, and Mercer has been protecting her. Finally, someone is catching them." The anonymous post triggered a cascade. Other aviation industry insiders began sharing their own experiences, not with Sandra specifically, but with the culture of quiet discrimination that her behavior represented. Stories emerged of pilots, questioned careers, derailed complaints filed, and then mysteriously buried. News outlets began reaching out for comment. CNN. "We are tracking a developing story at Boston Logan Airport, where a decorated pilot appears to have been detained based on accusations that witnesses are calling fraudulent. FAA officials are now on scene. More as this develops." The New York Times Captain Nathaniel Brooks, a 22-year aviation veteran and decorated Air Force pilot, was allegedly accused of presenting false credentials by a flight attendant who multiple witnesses say did not verify his documentation before destroying it. The incident is being called one of the most public examples of alleged discrimination in recent aviation history. Reuters federal authorities have arrived at Boston Logan International Airport amid viral videos showing a confrontation between airline staff and a black pilot. The airline's stock dropped 4% in after-hours trading following the initial video posts. Atlantic Sky's social media team was in full crisis mode. Their holiday campaign, "Flying You Home for Christmas," was being buried under thousands of angry comments. You are flying discrimination home for Christmas. The only thing Atlantic Sky is delivering is racism. How about standing against our own pilots for Christmas? Their corporate account's most recent post, a cheerful image of wrapped presents beside an aircraft, had become the gathering point for outrage. 127,000 comments and counting. 45,000 quote tweets, mostly negative. Stock price down 6.3% and falling. Somewhere in a corporate office, executives were being pulled from holiday parties to manage a crisis that grew worse by the minute. Legal teams were being assembled. PR consultants were being contracted. Emergency board meetings were being scheduled. But at Gate C-17, the person at the center of the storm remained perfectly still. Captain Nathaniel Brooks stood where he had been standing since Sandra Whitfield first confronted him. His uniform was still pressed. His posture was still impeccable. His face still carried that extraordinary calm that so many people were now analyzing in freeze frames and slow-motion replays. Derek Sullivan, who had captured more viral moments than he could count in his tech career, recognized something in Nate's composure that transcended ordinary patience. He knew, Derek murmured to himself. He knew this was going to happen. Maybe not today, maybe not here, but he was ready. It was true. Nate had spent his entire life preparing for moments like this, moments when everything he had earned would be questioned, when his competence would be doubted, when his presence would be challenged simply because of who he was. He had prepared by being excellent. He had prepared by being patient. And he had prepared by ensuring that when the moment finally came, he would have weapons his attackers could not imagine. Those weapons had just arrived. Right now, as you are watching this, millions of people around the world are witnessing what happened at Gate C-17. The hashtag is trending worldwide. The airline's stock is plummeting. Executives are being pulled from holiday parties to manage a crisis they never saw coming. and Captain Nathaniel Brooks is still standing exactly where he has earned the right to stand. But here is what the people who tried to destroy him did not know. Nate Brooks is not just a pilot. He is a decorated Air Force veteran who flew combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. He is the man industry insiders call the Storm Walker for his legendary ability to land safely in conditions that ground other pilots. He is the man who carried a wounded general 3 miles through enemy territory in 2009 when every rule said to leave him behind. And he is connected to people in places that Sandra Whitfield and Douglas Mercer could not reach if they climbed their corporate ladders for 1,000 years. The call he made 15 minutes into this confrontation did not go to a lawyer. It did not go to a union representative. It went to a former JAG officer who runs a specialized practice in civil rights and aviation law, a man named Victor Reyes, who has been preparing for exactly this kind of case. Victor made calls of his own. One went to the FAA, one went to the Department of Transportation, and one went to a retired general who walks with a cane and has never forgotten the young pilot who refused to leave him behind in a desert that wanted them both dead. The cavalry has arrived. You are about to see what happens when the powerful finally face consequences for their actions. But before we continue, I want you to think about something. How many times has this happened without cameras? How many pilots have been questioned, accused, and destroyed when no one was there to witness? How many careers have ended because someone's instincts were actually prejudice with a uniform? Captain Brooks was ready. He had documentation. He had connections. He had 22 years of impeccable service that made him untouchable, or would have if the truth still mattered in these situations. Most people do not have what he has. Most people face these moments alone without witnesses, without recordings, without the infrastructure to fight back. That is why this story matters. Not just for Nate Brooks, but for everyone who has ever been told they do not belong where they have earned the right to stand. Share this video. Subscribe to this channel. And if you have ever faced your own Gate C-17, your own moment when someone decided you did not fit their expectations, tell your story in the comments below. Because silence protects the people who do these things. And today at Gate C-17, silence ended. Now watch what happens next. Agent William Foster walked through Boston Logan Terminal C with the measured pace of a man who had learned that authority did not require speed. At 48, with over 2 decades of federal service behind him, he had investigated aviation incidents ranging from mechanical failures to criminal conspiracies. He had testified before Congress. He had brought down executives who believed their positions made them immune to consequences. This case he suspected would be one of the most significant of his career. Behind him walked 2 additional FAA investigators and a representative from the Department of Transportation's Office of Civil Rights. Their credentials were visible, their purpose unmistakable. The crowd at Gate C-17 parted as they approached not from fear but from recognition that something decisive was about to happen. Foster took in the scene with practiced assessment. The pilot standing calm in the center, the flight attendant with mascara-streaked cheeks, the executive trying to project confidence while his hands trembled slightly at his sides. Multiple phones pointed in his direction recording. Witnesses clustered in groups, their body language clearly aligned with the pilot. "I am Agent William Foster, FAA." His voice carried without being raised the volume of someone accustomed to being heard. "This gate area is now under federal jurisdiction. Everyone involved in this incident will remain here for questioning." Douglas Mercer stepped forward, his executive reflexes defaulting to negotiation. "Agent Foster, I am sure we can resolve this through proper channels. These are the proper channels, Mr. Mercer." Foster's gaze did not waver. "You can cooperate or you can be detained. Your choice. I recommend cooperation." Something in Foster's tone, a cold certainty that carried the weight of authority Mercer could not match, stopped the executive's protest before it fully formed. Foster turned to Nate. "Captain Brooks, Agent Foster, I believe you have something for us." Nate nodded. He reached up to his captain's wings, the same wings Sandra had demanded he remove hours ago, and detached them carefully. From the back of the pin housing, he extracted a small device no larger than a button battery. Everything since I entered the terminal, audio timestamp location data, including... He paused, glancing at Mercer and Sandra. Including private conversations that took place approximately 11 minutes ago when these two individuals discussed fabricating additional evidence. Sandra's gasp was audible across the gate area. Mercer's face drained of color. That cannot be admissible. You recorded I recorded potential criminal activity in a public airport during the course of a federal investigation. Nate's voice remained perfectly level. The admissibility has already been established. Protocol Cardinal was designed specifically for situations like this. Foster accepted the device, handing it to one of his colleagues for immediate preservation. We also have independent witness testimony being compiled. He gestured toward Derek. And approximately 47 minutes of video documentation that is currently being viewed by several million people. Several million? Sandra's voice cracked. The number is still climbing. Foster consulted his phone briefly. Currently trending globally. I believe the phrase Atlantic sky is finished is appearing with some frequency. Rosa Delgado stepped forward, Tommy still clutching her hand. Agent Foster, I watched everything from the beginning. I will testify. I will swear to everything I saw. As will I. James Crawford moved beside her. I am a retired airline executive. I know how these situations are usually handled, and I know what I witnessed today was not standard procedure. It was targeted discrimination. Elena Vasquez raised her hand slightly, her voice stronger than it had been during her initial confrontation. I am a crew member. I saw the timestamp on the report Sandra filed. It was dated before any incident occurred. I saw her tear the captain's credentials without verification. Foster nodded, his investigators taking notes. Your statements will be recorded formally. I appreciate your willingness to come forward. He turned to Sandra Whitfield, and his tone shifted to something that made the air feel colder. Miss Whitfield, you filed a report accusing Captain Brooks of presenting fraudulent credentials, making threatening statements, and behaving aggressively toward crew members. I had concerns about your report was time-stamped at 2:47 p.m. Captain Brooks did not arrive at this gate until 3:12 p.m. Would you like to explain how you documented an incident 25 minutes before it occurred? Silence. I am also informed that the report was amended approximately 11 minutes ago to include additional allegations. Allegations that multiple witnesses describe as fabrications. Foster stepped closer. And I have audio evidence of a conversation between you and Mr. Mercer in which you were instructed to create those fabrications. Sandra's legs seemed to give way. She stumbled backward, catching herself on a nearby chair. Her face had gone from pale to gray, the color of someone watching their entire world collapse. I want a lawyer, she managed. You will have access to legal counsel. But first you are going to answer some questions. Foster's attention shifted to Mercer. As are you, Mr. Mercer. Mercer straightened, attempting to reassemble some version of executive dignity. I refuse to be interrogated in public. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. You have the right to be informed of the charges against you. Foster's voice was steady, clinical. Currently, those potential charges include conspiracy to file false federal aviation reports, obstruction of a federal investigation, civil rights violations, and accessory to defamation. Shall I continue? The air had gone completely still. Even the ambient noise of the terminal seemed to have faded, as if the entire airport were holding its breath. Ryan Mitchell stood beside his captain, his face showing the awe of a young man watching something he would remember for the rest of his life. "They actually did it," he whispered. "They actually got caught." "They always get caught. Eventually," Nate replied quietly. "The question is whether anyone is there to document it when it happens." Derek Sullivan lowered his phone for the first time in nearly an hour. His footage was complete. The story had told itself. What remained was resolution, the part of the narrative that so many similar stories never reached. Foster issued instructions to his team: secure the evidence, begin formal witness interviews, coordinate with terminal security for holding areas. The machinery of federal investigation began to turn efficient and unstoppable. Then he turned back to Nate. "Captain Brooks, based on the preliminary evidence, you will not be subject to any suspension or disciplinary action. Your credentials are confirmed valid. Your conduct throughout this incident has been exemplary." Nate nodded slightly. "Thank you, Agent Foster. There is someone who wanted me to pass along a message." Foster's voice softened slightly. "General Patterson sends his regards. He said to tell you that some debts can never be fully repaid, but watching that video reminded him of why he is still grateful every day." For the first time since the confrontation began, something shifted in Nate's expression. Not triumph, something closer to peace. The acknowledgement of a bond forged in blood and sand, still strong after all these years. "Tell him," Nate said quietly, "that we are even. We have always been even." Foster nodded. "I will pass that along." Across the gate area, the crowd that had gathered, witnesses, passengers, bystanders who had stopped to watch history unfold, began to understand that what they had witnessed was not just a confrontation. It was a turning point, a moment when the usual script had been rewritten, when power had been held accountable, when dignity had prevailed. And it had happened 3 days before Christmas in a terminal decorated with lights and ribbons and the promise of peace on Earth. Sometimes peace had to be fought for. Sometimes it arrived through courage. And sometimes it wore the wings of a pilot who refused to be broken. The click of authoritative heels announced her arrival before anyone saw her face. Captain Diana Lawson strode through the terminal with the bearing of a woman who had spent 28 years commanding aircraft and the people who flew them. At 52, she was Atlantic Sky's chief pilot, the highest-ranking flight officer in the company, answerable only to the CEO himself. She had been pulled from a holiday dinner with her family, briefed during the 20-minute drive to the airport, and shown the viral video that was currently destroying her airline's reputation in real time. Her first thought, how did we let this happen? Her second thought, how do we fix it? Her third thought, watching Sandra Whitfield's smug smile freeze-framed on her phone. Someone is going to pay for this. The crowd recognized her immediately. Her 4 stripes, matching Nate's, carried the weight of ultimate flight authority. Passengers who had been angry and confused suddenly felt something else, the presence of accountability arriving. Captain Brooks. Her voice carried the crispness of flight deck communication, no wasted words, maximum clarity. Captain Lawson. Their eyes met across the chaos of Gate C-17. 2 pilots. 2 decades of service each. 2 people who understood the weight of wings and the responsibility they represented. I have reviewed everything, Lawson continued. The flight data, the documentation, the footage that is currently playing on every news network in the country. She paused. Your credentials are valid. Your record is impeccable. You should be in a cockpit right now, not surrounded by security. I agree. Lawson turned to face Sandra Whitfield, or what remained of Sandra Whitfield's composure. The flight attendant stood between 2 federal investigators, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Miss Whitfield, you are suspended immediately pending full investigation. Lawson's voice carried no emotion, only finality. You will surrender your badge, your company ID, and all airline-issued equipment before leaving this terminal. You cannot, Sandra started. I can, and I have. The CEO authorized my actions during my drive here. You may appeal through proper channels, but until this investigation is complete, you do not represent Atlantic Sky Airlines in any capacity." Sandra's mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. Her world had narrowed to a single crushing reality. Everything she had built, everything she had gotten away with, everything she believed she could continue to do with impunity, all of it was ending in public humiliation. Lawson turned to Douglas Mercer. "You too, Douglas. Diana, this is an overreaction. It is an appropriate reaction to what I have seen on video. It is an appropriate reaction to witness testimony describing coordinated discrimination. And it is an appropriate reaction to the federal investigation that is about to tear through your division's records for the past 10 years. Her eyes held his. "How many pilots, Douglas? How many careers? How many people did you and Sandra destroy while the rest of us looked the other way?" Mercer said nothing. For once, his executive smoothness had deserted him completely. "I will tell you the number," Lawson continued, "because I have been on the phone with investigators for the past 20 minutes. They are already pulling files. 3 confirmed. Possibly more. Captain David Moreno demoted after Sandra's complaint. No corroborating evidence ever found. First Officer James Turner terminated complaint originated from Sandra. Captain William Reyes forced into early retirement after documented patterns of complaints that all traced back to the same source." She stepped closer to Mercer, her voice dropping but still audible to the surrounding witnesses. "You protected her every single time. You buried the complaints. You made the problems disappear. And you thought no one would ever connect the dots. I was managing situations. You were destroying people. There is a difference." Lawson turned back to the crowd, to Rosa, still holding Tommy's hand, to Derek, still recording to James Crawford, standing witness after 40 years of silence, to Elena, who had risked everything to tell the truth. On behalf of Atlantic Sky Airlines, she said, her voice carrying across the gate area, "I apologize for what you witnessed today. This behavior does not represent our values. It does not represent the thousands of employees who serve with integrity, and it will not be tolerated." She looked at Nate. "Captain Brooks, are you prepared to fly? I have been prepared since I arrived at this terminal. Then let us get these passengers to Miami." Lawson raised her voice. "Flight 1947 to Miami will be departing in 45 minutes. Captain Nathaniel Brooks is your pilot. I personally guarantee his competence, his credentials, and his commitment to your safety." A ripple of applause began somewhere in the crowd. It spread quickly, building into a wave that filled the gate area with the sound of vindication. Not celebration, something deeper. The acknowledgement that justice, for once, had prevailed. Tommy broke free from Rosa's hand and ran toward Nate. The captain knelt to meet him, bringing himself to the child's eye level. "Are you going to fly the plane now?" Tommy asked. "I am. Can I see the cockpit before we take off?" Nate smiled, the first full smile he had allowed himself since this ordeal began. "I think that can be arranged." Rosa approached, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "God bless you, Captain. God bless you for standing tall. Thank you for standing with me, Mrs. Delgado." Nate took her hand gently. "Your courage meant more than you know." "It was not courage," Rosa said. "It was just telling the truth. The courage was yours." Around them, the machinery of justice continued to turn. Sandra was escorted toward holding areas. Mercer was led away for formal questioning. Statements were being recorded, evidence preserved, a case being built that would echo through aviation industry conference rooms for years to come. But at the center of it all, a pilot and a child stood together, united by something simpler and stronger than policy or procedure. Hope. The airport administration wing had been transformed into a temporary federal facility. Conference rooms became interview spaces. Break areas became evidence processing centers. The holiday decorations that lined the hallways, wreaths tinsel a small Christmas tree by the water cooler, seemed almost grotesque against the gravity of what was unfolding. Sandra Whitfield sat alone in a conference room separated from the terminal where her world had collapsed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the indifferent hum of institutional spaces. Across the table sat Agent William Foster, his file folder open, his expression unreadable. "Miss Whitfield?" He began, his voice carrying the flat neutrality of formal investigation. "I want to be clear about your situation. You have the right to an attorney. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Do you understand these rights?" Sandra nodded, her eyes red, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "For the record, please confirm verbally." "I understand," she whispered. "Good." Foster turned a page in his folder. "Let us start with the incident report you filed at 2:47 p.m. today. This report described Captain Nathaniel Brooks arriving at your gate with suspicious documentation and behaving in a hostile and threatening manner." He looked up. Captain Brooks did not arrive at gate C-17 until 3:12 p.m. That is 25 minutes after your report was filed. How do you explain that Sandra's mouth worked silently for a moment? I must have entered the time wrong. A mistake. A mistake that just happened to create documentation of an incident before that incident occurred. Yes. I was stressed. The holidays, the pressure. Foster let the silence stretch. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less sharp. "We have also reviewed the modifications made to your report approximately 11 minutes ago. You added allegations of verbal threats and aggressive behavior. Allegations that were not present in the original filing. I remembered additional details. You remembered them while standing near Douglas Mercer, with whom you were observed having a private conversation. A conversation that was recorded." Sandra's already pale face went chalk white. Recorded. Captain Brooks was wearing a device provided by a federal task force investigating discrimination in commercial aviation. Audio recording timestamp synchronized to federal servers admissible in court. Foster closed his folder. "We have you on tape being instructed by your supervisor to fabricate evidence." The sound Sandra made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her composed facade already cracked, shattered completely. I was not trying to." Her voice fragmented. "Douglas told me. He said it was how things were done. Explain that statement, please." And she did. Haltingly, tearfully, desperately, the dam that had held back years of complicity burst open under the weight of federal consequence. Douglas Mercer had identified her years ago. She had a talent, he said, a willingness to act. There were certain pilots who did not fit the culture, who needed to be managed, who would be better off in different positions or different airlines entirely. He never used explicit language. He did not have to. Sandra had understood. Sandra had delivered. Captain David Moreno. First Officer James Turner. Captain William Reyes. 3 pilots whose careers had been destroyed through the same process, Sandra raising concerns, filing reports, creating documentation that built cases over time. Mercer providing cover-burying counter-complaints, ensuring that her targets never had the institutional support to fight back. "I thought I was protecting the airline," Sandra said, her voice barely audible. "That is what Douglas always said. We were protecting the brand, maintaining standards." "Standards," Foster repeated. Were these standards applied equally to all crew members? The silence that followed was answer enough. In an adjacent conference room, Douglas Mercer faced a different interrogator. His lawyer sat beside him, a partner from one of Boston's most expensive firms called away from a holiday gathering and still wearing his cocktail attire beneath a hastily acquired overcoat. My client maintains that any actions taken were within the scope of normal airline management, the lawyer said. Personnel decisions involve subjective assessments. Personnel decisions do not typically involve pre-written incident reports, coordinated false accusations, or whispered instructions to fabricate evidence in airport terminals. The DOT representative, a woman in her 50s with the demeanor of someone who had seen corporate deflection countless times, was unmoved. We have audio. We have witnesses. We have a pattern spanning multiple years involving multiple victims. Mercer sat rigid in his chair, his executive polish eroding with each passing minute. The control he had wielded for decades, the ability to manage situations to make problems disappear, to ensure that power-protected power had evaporated completely. "I want to make a deal," he said suddenly. His lawyer's head snapped toward him. "Douglas, I advise against. There are others, at the regional level, at corporate, people who knew, people who looked the other way." Mercer's voice had taken on the desperation of a man watching his final options narrow to a single path. "I can give you names, documentation, the whole network." The DOT representative exchanged a glance with Foster, who had just entered the room. "We are listening." And so Douglas Mercer, who had spent 30 years building walls of protection and influence, began tearing them down. Not from conscience, from calculation. The same calculation that had guided his career now guided his self-preservation. But the result would be the same exposure accountability consequence. In the hallway outside, Elena Vasquez finished giving her formal statement to a young FAA investigator. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her voice had been steady throughout. "Is that everything the investigator asked?" "Everything I witnessed today." Elena paused. "But if you are investigating patterns, Sandra has been at Atlantic Sky for 12 years. There might be people who saw things before I started, people who were afraid to speak up. We will be reaching out to current and former employees." Elena nodded. Then quietly, "Will I be protected? Will I still have a job after this?" The investigator looked at her with something approaching admiration. "You came forward with information critical to a federal investigation. That is protected activity. Anyone who retaliates against you will face additional federal charges. And Atlantic Sky. Atlantic Sky is about to undergo the most thorough review in its corporate history. The people who would have punished you for speaking up will not be in positions to punish anyone ever again." Elena absorbed this. The fear that had driven her silence for 18 months was still present, but smaller now. Manageable. Overcome by something she had forgotten, she possessed the courage her grandfather had always believed she would find. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for believing. Thank you for speaking up. It makes a difference." Elena walked down the hallway past the Christmas tree by the water cooler toward a gate area where a flight was finally preparing to depart. Behind her, the wheels of justice continued to turn. Gate C-17 had transformed. The tension that had gripped the space for hours had dissolved into something different. Anticipation, relief, the particular energy of people who had witnessed something they would tell their families about for years to come. The passengers who had been waiting some for over 3 hours, many having missed connections, all having experienced the extraordinary events of the afternoon, remained clustered near the boarding area. They had been offered rebooking compensation alternative arrangements. Almost none had accepted. They wanted to see this through. They wanted to fly with Captain Nathaniel Brooks. Nate emerged from the administrative wing, his uniform still pressed, his bearing unchanged. But something in his eyes had shifted, a softness that had not been there before, a vulnerability earned through surviving what should have been unsurvivable. He walked to the center of the gate area where the crowd naturally gathered around him. He did not use a microphone. His voice, trained to carry across cockpits and through intercoms, reached every corner of the space. "I want to thank you," he began. "Not for waiting, though your patience has been remarkable. I want to thank you for witnessing." The crowd was silent, attentive, drawn into his words. What happened today was not about me. It was about everyone who has ever been told they do not belong where they have earned the right to stand. Every pilot who has been questioned, every professional who has been doubted, every person who has been made to prove their competence not once but again and again, because something about them does not match someone else's expectations. He paused his gaze, finding faces in the crowd. Rosa still gripping Tommy's hand. Derek, his phone finally lowered. James Crawford, whose testimony would help dismantle a decade of discrimination. Sophia, whose social media thread had become a real-time chronicle of justice. I have been flying for 22 years. I have landed planes in hurricanes. I have talked panicking passengers through emergencies. I have brought thousands of people safely to their destinations. His voice dropped, grew more intimate. But none of that protected me today. My record, my credentials, my decades of service. None of it mattered to someone who had already decided I did not belong. He looked down at his captain's wings, now restored to his uniform after being used as evidence. These wings do not make me a pilot. My training does. My experience does. My commitment to every soul who boards my aircraft does. But these wings, he touched them gently. These wings reminded someone what I was supposed to be, and they could not reconcile what they expected with what they saw. Tommy broke from Rosa's grip and moved toward Nate, his small face earnest with the need to speak. "Captain Brooks." Nate knelt, bringing himself to the child's level. "Yes, Tommy, I am sorry that lady was mean to you. That was not fair. No, it was not. But you did not get mad. You just stayed calm." Tommy's brow furrowed with 8-year-old seriousness. "How did you do that?" Nate smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed his face. "My father taught me something when I was about your age. He said, 'Never let them see you break sun. Never give them what they expect. Stand tall and let the truth speak for itself.' Did the truth speak? It did. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes witnesses. Sometimes it takes people like your grandmother who was brave enough to stand up when it would have been easier to stay quiet." Nate glanced at Rosa, who was wiping tears from her cheeks. "But the truth always speaks eventually." Tommy nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom in the way children do, absorbing it into some deep place where it would inform decisions he had not yet imagined. "I want to be a pilot when I grow up," he announced. "Like you." "Then never let anyone tell you that you cannot." Nate extended his hand and Tommy shook it with exaggerated formality. "And when you are flying, remember your job is not just to move the aircraft. It is to bring every person on board safely home. That is the real privilege of the wings." Rosa approached her weathered hand, finding Nate's arm. "God bless you, Captain, for your patience, for your dignity, for showing my grandson what strength really looks like. God blessed me with witnesses today, Mrs. Delgado. You were one of them." Nate covered her hand with his own. "Your courage meant more than you know." "It was not courage," Rosa repeated what she had said earlier. "It was just telling the truth. Sometimes that is the bravest thing anyone can do." Around them, the crowd began to move toward the boarding area. The flight would depart. The passengers would reach Miami. Life would continue. But something had changed. In the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the day's events, something had shifted. A reminder of what was possible when people refused to stay silent. A demonstration of what happened when dignity refused to be surrendered. Ryan Mitchell appeared at Nate's side. "Captain, aircraft is prepped. Crew is ready. Passengers are eager to board." Nate straightened his uniform one final time. Then let us get these people home for Christmas. The jet bridge stretched before Nate like a tunnel from one world to another. Behind him lay the chaos of Gate C-17, the accusations, the witnesses, the turning wheels of federal investigation. Ahead lay the cockpit, the familiar instruments, the responsibility he had trained his entire life to carry. He walked the bridge with Ryan Mitchell beside him, their footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. Captain Ryan said quietly, "I just want you to know, standing with you today was the right thing to do. If it costs me anything, I would do it again." Nate glanced at his first officer. So young, so principled. The future of aviation if the industry could learn from days like this one. It will not cost you anything, Ryan. It is going to earn you more than you can imagine. The people who matter will remember that you stood for truth. I stood for you. Same thing today. They entered the aircraft, passing Elena Vasquez at the forward galley. She had chosen to remain on the flight, working alongside the crew member who had been called to replace Sandra. Her eyes met Nate's with quiet solidarity. "Captain Brooks," she said. "Welcome aboard. Miss Vasquez." He paused. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for giving me the courage to remember who I am supposed to be." The cockpit embraced Nate with its familiar geometry, the instrument panel, the throttle quadrant, the windows that would soon frame nothing but sky. He settled into the captain's seat with the bone-deep comfort of a man returning to his true home. Ryan took the right seat, beginning the pre-flight checklist with renewed focus. The routine felt sacred today, each item a reminder of purpose and responsibility. Fuel quantity verified. Verified. Nate confirmed. Flight management system programmed. Confirmed. Weather briefing reviewed. Clear skies to Miami. Light headwinds. We will make up time in the air. The checklist continued a liturgy of aviation that had guided countless flights to safe conclusions. Today it felt like prayer. A knock at the cockpit door interrupted their flow. Elena's voice came through Captain, "You have some visitors who would like a moment before departure." Nate opened the door to find Rosa and Tommy standing in the galley, Tommy's eyes wide with wonder at the sight of the cockpit. Mrs. Delgado, Nate said warmly, "Tommy, please come in." Tommy approached the captain's seat with the reverent caution of someone entering a cathedral. His small hands hovered near the controls, not quite touching, as if afraid to break something magical. All these buttons, he breathed. All these screens. What do they all do? Nate began to explain, pointing out the primary flight display, the navigation system, the weather radar. Tommy absorbed every word with the intensity of a child who had just discovered his calling. "Can you really fly this whole big plane? Just with your hands? My hands, my training, my knowledge, and my crew." Nate gestured toward Ryan. "No pilot flies alone. We are a team. Every person on this aircraft plays a part in getting everyone home safely." Rosa watched from the doorway, her eyes glistening. "His grandfather would have loved to see this," she murmured to Elena. "He always dreamed of flying. Never got the chance." Tommy turned to Nate with sudden seriousness. "Captain Brooks, what is the most important part of flying?" Nate considered the question carefully. "The instruments tell you where you are. The controls respond to your inputs. The engines provide the power." He tapped his chest. "But the most important part is right here. The heart, the will to bring everyone home safe, the refusal to give up when things get hard. Is that why you stayed so calm today? Because of your heart? Partly. But also because I have been through hard things before. When you survive challenges, they do not disappear, but they make you stronger. They teach you that storms pass. That truth wins eventually. That standing tall is always worth it." Tommy nodded, filing this away alongside all the other lessons the day had taught him. "I am going to remember that. When I am a pilot." "When you are a pilot," Nate agreed. Not if. When. Rosa extended her hand and Nate shook it warmly. Safe travels, Captain. And Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Delgado. Thank you for your witness today. She led Tommy back toward their seats, the little boy looking over his shoulder until the cockpit door closed between them. Ryan exhaled slowly. That was something. That is why we fly, Nate replied. Not for the mechanics, for moments like that, for the chance to show someone what is possible. The final preparations completed. The ground crew cleared the aircraft. The tower crackled to life. Atlantic Sky 1847. You are cleared for pushback. Nate keyed the intercom. His voice, calm, assured, unmistakably in command, filled the cabin. Good evening, passengers. This is Captain Nathaniel Brooks. On behalf of First Officer Ryan Mitchell and our cabin crew, welcome aboard Flight 1947 to Miami. In the cabin, passengers settled into their seats, their attention drawn to the voice of the man they had just watched triumph over injustice. I know today was unusual, Nate continued. I know many of you witnessed things that should not happen, but I also saw something else. I saw people stand up. I saw witnesses become advocates. I saw strangers become allies. And I saw courage in places I did not expect to find it. He paused, letting the words settle. So thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your voices. And thank you for reminding me why I fly. Flight time to Miami is approximately 3 hours. Weather is clear. Skies are open. Let us go home for Christmas. The engine spooled up a deep thrumming that vibrated through the aircraft like a heartbeat. The plane began to move, following the taxi lines toward the runway. Rosa crossed herself and squeezed Tommy's hand. Derek Sullivan smiled and opened his notes app. He would write about this day for weeks to come. James Crawford looked out the window at the receding terminal, thinking about the man he had finally decided to become. Sophia Morales closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the tension of the day begin to release. And in the cockpit, Captain Nathaniel Brooks guided his aircraft toward the sky, where the only thing that mattered was the destination ahead and the souls he had sworn to protect. The wheels left the ground. Boston fell away beneath them. And for the first time all day, Nate allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had survived and the profound gratitude of still being allowed to fly. The news broke like a wave across every platform that evening. CNN, Atlantic Sky, Airlines flight attendant and regional director arrested, following viral discrimination. Incident at Boston. Logan, The New York Times, federal investigation reveals. Years of targeting at major airline. 3 pilots cleared compensation. Expected Reuters. Atlantic Sky stock plummets. 12% as scope of discrimination. Pattern becomes clear. CEO calls emergency board meeting. The consequences arrived swiftly, each one building on the last until the avalanche of accountability became impossible to stop. Sandra Whitfield was terminated the same evening, her 12-year career ending not with retirement but with federal charges. Her flight attendant certification was suspended pending FAA review, a process that would ultimately result in permanent revocation. The 3 pilots whose careers she had destroyed, David Moreno, James Turner, William Reyes, filed civil lawsuits within 48 hours. Their cases would eventually settle for amounts that made national headlines, but the legal consequences paled against the social ones. Sandra's name became shorthand for a particular kind of discrimination, the weaponization of procedure against people it was supposed to protect. Aviation training programs incorporated her case into their curricula. She was studied, analyzed, discussed. The smug confidence that had defined her career was replaced by an infamy she could never escape. Douglas Mercer's fall was even more spectacular. His cooperation with investigators bought him a reduced sentence, but not redemption. The network he revealed executives who had looked the other way, HR managers who had buried complaints, legal staff who had crafted language to obscure discrimination behind policy, all of it unraveled in the weeks that followed. His corner office was eventually converted into Atlantic Sky's new Equity and Inclusion Center. His name was deliberately not included on any signage. His legacy was erasure. Bradley Thornton learned that wealth provided less protection than he had imagined. Derek Sullivan's video of his bus driving comment was viewed over 12 million times. Within a week, 3 institutional investors had pulled their capital from his firm. His country club suggested a leave of absence that became permanent when other members made clear they did not wish to be associated with his conduct. The business card he had thrown at Nate's feet with its handwritten insult was framed and displayed in the pilot's lounge at Boston Logan. A plaque beneath it read, "Character is revealed in how we treat others. This is a reminder to be better." His career continued but diminished, shadowed by a moment of cruelty that the internet would never forget. The witnesses found their lives changed in unexpected ways. Rosa Delgado received letters from pilots across the country thanking her for speaking up. She kept them in a special box, reading them to Tommy when he visited. "This is what happens when you tell the truth, mijo," she would say. "People remember. People are grateful." James Crawford established a scholarship fund for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds. He named it for his late wife, Louise, hoping she could somehow know that he had finally stopped being a bystander. The fund provided full flight training for 20 students in its first year alone. Derek Sullivan's video became the most viewed aviation-related content of the year. He used the platform it gave him to advocate for transparency and accountability across industries, becoming an unexpected voice for corporate reform. Sophia Morales matched into her first-choice residency program at Massachusetts General. During her interview, the panel had asked about her social media thread from Gate C-17. "It showed us who you are," the chief of medicine had told her. "Someone who stands for their patients no matter the cost." Elena Vasquez was promoted to senior flight attendant within 6 months, not as compensation for her testimony, but as recognition of the qualities her courage had revealed. She became a mentor to new crew members, teaching them that integrity mattered more than self-preservation. And Ryan Mitchell continued to fly as Nate's first officer, their partnership strengthening with each flight until the day he earned his own captain's stripes. At his promotion ceremony, he publicly thanked Nate for showing him what leadership truly meant. Christmas Day arrived 3 days later. The storm had passed. The consequences continued to unfold. But in a small house in Atlanta, Georgia, none of that mattered. Nate sat beside his mother, Grace Brooks, now 78 years old, in the living room where he had grown up. The Christmas tree in the corner was the same artificial tree she had used for 30 years, slightly crooked, decorated with ornaments that carried decades of memories. On the mantel in a silver frame was a photograph of his father, Raymond, the carpenter who had built churches with his hands and character in his son. "Your father would be so proud," Grace said, her hand finding Nate's. Her eyes were clear despite her years, her voice strong despite the emotion behind it. "I felt him with me, Mama," Nate replied quietly. "The whole time. When she tore those documents, when security closed in, when everyone was watching, I heard his voice. 'Never let them see you break, son.'" Grace squeezed his hand. "You did not break. I never will." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the Christmas lights blink on the tree, listening to carols play softly from the old radio Grace still refused to replace. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Nate opened it to find a courier holding a small package. "Captain Nathaniel Brooks. That is me." He signed for the delivery and brought it inside. The package was light, carefully wrapped. No return address, but something about it felt significant. Inside was a model airplane, a small replica of the UH-60 Black Hawk he had flown in Afghanistan. and beneath it a handwritten letter on paper that bore no letterhead but carried unmistakable weight. "Dear Captain Brooks, I am Tommy. My grandma Rosa helped me write this. Thank you for showing me that pilots can look like anyone. Thank you for being brave when people were mean. I am going to be a pilot when I grow up. I want to be like you. My grandma says you carried a general through the desert when you were in the army. She says that is what heroes do. I think you are a hero. Merry Christmas." Your friend Tommy Delgado Nate read the letter 3 times. The 4th time he read it aloud to his mother. When he finished, Grace was crying. So was he. "That is your legacy," she whispered. "Not the investigations or the news coverage. Not the lawsuits or the firings. That boy. His dreams. What you showed him was possible." Nate placed the model airplane on the mantel beside his father's photograph. 2 symbols of courage from different eras united by the same truth. Standing tall was never about what you gained. It was about what you gave to those who came after you. He picked up his phone and dialed Victor Reyes. "Nate, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Victor. I want to start something. Flying lessons for kids who have never seen a cockpit. Scholarships, mentorship, everything it takes to help them reach the sky." Victor paused. "You want to call it something?" Nate looked at his father's picture, at the model airplane, at the letter from an 8-year-old boy who now dreamed of flying because a pilot had refused to be broken. "Call it Stand Tall." Within a year, the program had enrolled 340 young people from underserved communities. 47 earned pilot certifications. 3 were hired by major airlines. One of them, eventually, was Tommy Delgado. On December 22, 2024, a flight attendant looked at Captain Nathaniel Brooks and saw someone who did not belong. She did not see the 22 years of service. She did not see the 14,200 flight hours. She did not see the lives he had saved, the storms he had navigated, the wounded general he had carried out of hell. She saw what she wanted to see, and she paid the price. But this story is not about punishment. It is about what happens when people find their voices. Rosa Delgado, a 71-year-old grandmother who stood up when everyone else stayed seated, who told the truth when silence would have been easier, who showed her grandson what courage looks like in ordinary moments. James Crawford, a man who had been silent for 40 years, who finally spoke, who established a scholarship fund to ensure that future pilots would have chances he had failed to protect, who proved that it is never too late to become the person you should have been. Elena Vasquez, a junior flight attendant who risked everything to tell the truth, who remembered her grandfather's words and chose integrity over security, who discovered that standing for something was worth more than any job title. Ryan Mitchell, a young pilot who stood beside his captain when it mattered most, who refused to be intimidated, who showed that allyship is not a word, it is an action. Derek Sullivan, who recorded not for clicks, but for accountability, who used his platform to ensure that truth could not be buried, who proved that witnesses change outcomes. Sophia Morales, who documented every moment in real time, who helped millions understand what they were seeing, who demonstrated that silence is a choice and so is speaking up. And Tommy Delgado, an 8-year-old boy who asked the question that cut through all the noise. Is that man a bad guy? No, Tommy. He is not. He is exactly the kind of man we need more of. The kind who carries people when carrying is hard. The kind who stands tall when the world wants him to kneel. The kind who shows children what is possible even when the adults around them have forgotten. Captain Nathaniel Brooks kept flying, not because he had to offers poured in from every major airline, from consulting firms, from speaking circuits that would have made him wealthy. He kept flying because that is who he is. Because every flight is a promise. Because every safe landing is proof that dignity cannot be stripped away by those who refuse to see it. The program he founded, Stand Tall, has now helped hundreds of young people reach for dreams that once seemed impossible. Pilots, mechanics, engineers, air traffic controllers, a generation learning that the sky belongs to anyone willing to work for it. And Tommy Delgado. He got his pilot's license on his 18th birthday. His instructor was Captain Nathaniel Brooks. "I told you," Nate said, handing him the certificate. "When, not if." Tommy looked at the document in his hands, proof of something he had believed since he was 8 years old, standing in a cockpit at Gate C-17, learning that dreams and courage were the same thing. "You kept your promise," Tommy said. "I always do. Justice is not loud. It does not require revenge. It does not demand destruction. Justice is a pilot who keeps flying, a child who learns to dream, a grandmother who speaks up, an executive who finally finds his conscience, a flight attendant who chooses integrity, a first officer who stands with his captain. Justice is all of us every day deciding whether to witness or look away, whether to speak or stay silent, whether to stand tall or let the weight of the world press us down. The choice is always ours. If you believe that everyone deserves to reach their destination with dignity, share this story. Subscribe to this channel. And leave a comment below. Have you ever had to stand tall when someone tried to make you feel small? Because silence protects the people who do these things. And today at Gate C-17, silence ended. Not with shouts, not with violence, not with the destruction of enemies, with witnesses, with courage, with the quiet, unstoppable power of people who refused to look away. Captain Nathaniel Brooks did not just survive that day in Boston. He reminded us what we are capable of when we choose to be better. Happy holidays, stand tall, and never let them see you break. Because the storm that Nate weathered was not just about one flight, it was about all of us. And it is not over yet. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that one person standing tall can change everything, then do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it tells the algorithm that stories about justice and courage matter. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage about moments when dignity wins against all odds. Third, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has faced their own Gate C-17. Someone who has been told they do not belong. Someone who needs to remember that standing tall is always worth it. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever had a moment when you had to choose between staying silent and speaking up? Your story matters. Your voice matters. And together, we build a world where moments like what happened to Captain Brooks become history instead of headlines. Thank you for watching. Thank you for witnessing. And remember, the sky belongs to everyone brave enough to reach for it. Stand tall.
Да ебать, вы чё? Это фол, 100%. Да не такой. Красу. Судья продажный. Судья продажный, продажный. Судья продажный. Продажный судья.
Не надо брать, мы сейчас ничего не добьемся. Это не красная карта. Только на красную можно. Желтую даст, если не красную. Потом нахуй дать желтую даст.
Да не на красную. Так, смотрим.
Там не красная, но желтая, но желтая.
Она занят, ну, дайте пространство ему. Так, смотрим. Да не, это фол.
Чистый валик.
Да не, это фол, это фол. Не. Что? Ничего? Не было фола?
Красный не надо, в игре надо свист. Что, ебанулись нахуй?
Бля, это ужас. Честно, это ужас. Он уже борет его, просто борьба.
Так он даже...
Бля, это именно ужас. Ну это просто Чембулатов, это просто судья.
Вар нужно. Нужно сделать на пике комнату мне и Сэму, и там вар поставить. Мы там...
Вали! Хорош, Яра! Сзади дала! Дал левая рука! Правая рука! Хорош, дал, право! Один!
Хорош, да!
Сзади!
Пошел, да! Где? Ай! Бля, напряженка, пиздец.
Хорош, дал, хорош!
Здорово.
Закончится в ничью. Матч перейдет в серию из 3 буллетов.
Не вали!
Если
Не вали! Все, дал! Хорош!
Да, как через эту хуйню пить, я не понимаю.
Право! Его! Здорово! Браво! Дал, у тебя, смотри, правая рука дал. Дал, лужи немного. Все, да, да. Пойди! Мазу один, маза! Левая, маза! Не пали, правая! Не пали!
Спокойно.
Правая! Ваша умница! Ярик, поднимай, Ярик, успевай!
Его
сейчас загоняют, чтобы он...
Да, неудобно пить, блядь.
Литвинович 3 забил Михаил Литвин.
Все, правильно! Один! Горит!
Народ.
Президент включился.
Фали!
Не фали.
Правая!
Народ. Литвин.
Арс также, ой, Ярик, отрезай ему, да, эту ногу.
Спина!
Сейчас, ты знаешь, что будет, если 4-4?
Да.
Знаешь, что
Буллиты,
будет?
да?
Да, буллиты.
Давай!
По-моему, 3. По-моему, 3 буллитов.
Бля, 15 секунд осталось.
Давай!
Блядь, да ну нахуй.
Назад!
Блядь. Спокойно. Хорош там.
Давай!
Ну, давай, пацаны.
Дава, поднимайся сюда.
До конца.
Играет гол первого
Попробуй. Нужен. Спокойно.
Это не карточка!
Желтую, блядь. Вась, бей сам, да и все.
Давай, пацаны. Бей нас.
Дальний! Эй, блядь! Сзади! Хорош! Эй!
Бля, что за хуйня? Ебать, я вах. Осуждаю. Что там, покажите.
Все, друзья, кто, пожалуйста, не бьет,
Что, Хэппиша нету?
Идем разыграем.
Так, а что, кто? Кто бьет? Арсенал, да, должен быть?
Приглашаем капитанов команд для
Бля, Мирхан уехал, понял, не вовремя. Кто звал? О, здорово, брат. Здорово, братиш.
Как дела?
Нормально, ты как?
Охуительно.
Вон наши братишки сидят.
Егор, дай воды.
Что, мне с двух ног куда-то влететь надо? Да я 2 раза сыграл, и то не жестко, а меня уже ругают, блядь. Я в Анару чисто в мяч сыграл, чисто в мяч. Я прям почувствовал, что я носочком мячик толкнул, и все.
Они первые бьют.
Итак, второй тайм завершился в ничью. Обе команды
Мужчин, давайте линию.
на одному очку в турнирную таблицу регулярного чемпионата.
Не ругали?
Сейчас в серии улитов команды разыграют еще одно очко.
Бля, снюс хочется очень.
Первыми исполняют
Кого это было?
суперзвезды или президенты команды.
Ща. Суля! Суля! Уцы, ты с кем? Это ты с... Твои подруги? А, успокойся, иди Байру найди. Суля, есть допинг? Бля. Сможешь подраться?
Итак, начинаем серию улитов. Просим
Спасибо.
всех удалиться в студию, кроме судей, оператора, СМР.
Бить? Нет. Я бить не хочу. Болит. Я бить не хочу.
Сэм!
Все, пацаны. Я здесь.
Сэм Морозов занимает место в воротах. Первый буллет будет исполнять удрот с мяча Анар.
Анар.
Да, пожалуйста, Сэм, только, бля, он будет бить просто. Просто будет бить, не прыгать нахуй. Пашка уже показал. Давай, Сэмчик! Сэм, бля, давай, Сэм!
Сура, 0-1-0.
Сэм!
Право, влево. Ай! Хорош! Сура, хорош! Хорош!
Бля, почему наши болельщики?
Давай, давай! Давай.
Только не перекидывай, как
Ай,
Минске.
тигр! Ай, тигр! Ай, тигр! Давай, давай, Мишаня, пошел. Уверенно, уверенно. Че, и раздавил вратаря. Спасайте. Какой челлендж?
Какой челлендж, блядь, ёпта, блядь.
Да не. Он уже потом, он сам не... Не, там ничего не было.
Не, это хуйня, какой челлендж.
Со мной что, блядь? Он потом наступил уже.